Chapter 426. Although Eric was not in Los Angeles, after a long period of publicity, Toy Story began a small-scale pre-screening while Throat Island was being screened internally. The novel 3D animation form, warm and interesting plot, and the fable storyline quickly caused a huge sensation in the media. Unlike Disney's traditional fairy tales of princes and princesses, this film tells a story about friendship, trust, and search from the perspective of toys. This is a fable for adults. The elements of heroes and anti-heroes are the main content pillars. The collective big family feels lively and will always sublimate a lot of warm scenes. Buzz and Woody's heroic feelings and simple sincerity can be found in our shadows. A little dark humor does not damage the beauty that is worth believing in. A new form of animated film. Pixar's 3D animation technology will undoubtedly bring about a reform relative to hand-drawn animation. In just a week, the pre-screening almost reached the sum of all the previous publicity. Influenced by the one-sided praise from the media, Firefly's publicity department was greatly confident. After Michael Lynn discussed with Eric on the phone, he once again increased the budget of Toy Story by $10 million. The total cost of production and distribution of the film also reached the level of a $70 million blockbuster. However, Eric knew that as long as Toy Story could establish the status of 3D animation in Hollywood, the total cost of $70 million was definitely worth it. What's more, according to the data in his memory, Firefly was confident enough to recover the entire cost of Toy Story with the local distribution in North America alone. The subsequent distribution through various channels would also bring a lot of net profits to Firefly. The most important thing was that before this, Firefly had already registered the trademarks of all the toys in this animated film. Eric knew very well that the profits brought by the licensing of the animated images in Toy Story were definitely no less than the box office revenue of this animated film. Compared to the publicity of Toy Story, the pre-screening of Throat Island seemed to be much more low-key. After the internal test, although Disney did not have much confidence in the film, they did not think that it would be a box office dud. Even though Disney didn't hold a large-scale test screening because the movie still needed to be modified, they didn't relax at all in terms of TV previews, billboards, and other publicity. Michael Eisner seemed to have the idea of making up for the lack of quality publicity. Not only did he not reduce the publicity budget of Cutthroat Island, but he also proposed to increase the budget. As an important investor of Cutthroat Island, Robert Shea had already determined that Cutthroat Island would cost him a lot of money. After being in Hollywood for so many years, he could imagine that if the movie sold well, it would be fine. Once the box office failed, Disney would definitely try to pass the loss on to him, an outsider. Therefore, he refused to fork out a single cent and even got into an argument with Michael Eisner. It was Michael Eisner who proposed to increase the publicity budget, but at this moment, he certainly wouldn't let Disney bear the cost alone. Therefore, he took out the contract and forced Robert Shea to fork out a budget according to the investment ratio. Robert Shea could only swallow this loss. He knew that if he didn't want to pay at this time, then Disney would have more reasons to pass the box office failure on to him. According to Disney's expectations, Cutthroat Island had the gimmick of a Hollywood blockbuster with an investment of more than 100 million yuan. Even if the plot, well, it was a bit messy, but it was not like there was no precedent in the history of Hollywood where the plot was messy but sold well. Therefore, Disney optimistically predicted that Cutthroat Island could at least get a guaranteed box office of $80 million, and the overseas box office was expected to reach this figure. After the release of the two important box office channels, although there would still be losses, after the subsequent sales of videotapes and television broadcast rights, there would definitely be no problem in recovering the cost within 2 years. Even if the movie Toy Story later received a very good reputation, Disney felt that its monopoly in the Hollywood animation industry would be threatened. However, because Toy Story and Cutthroat Island were two movies for completely different audiences, Disney did not feel too much pressure. In late June, the 1991 summer break had lasted for a month. This summer break began with the sequel of Condor Rebel 2, released at the end of May by Fox. At the end of last year, Condor Rebel 2 received a global box office of nearly $200 million with an investment of more than $20 million. The profit was higher than Die Hard 2, that Fox starred in last year. Therefore, Fox couldn't wait to launch the second movie. However, the last time they paid 30% of the investment because they asked Eric to choose the script. As a result, Eric got a profit of about $50 million with an investment of more than $8 million, which made Fox's heart ache. Therefore, Fox directly pretended to be deaf and mute about the production of the sequel and did not mention it. Eric was very busy. There was no specific contract for this matter, and Eric was too lazy to argue with Fox. After the previous parody of Top Gun, the sequel continued with the original style and chose to parody Sylvester Stallone's First Blood. Unfortunately, Fox played this sequel too much. Although the parody of the sequel was crazier than the first movie and the cost had increased to $40 million, for some reason, the audience just didn't buy it. From the end of May to the end of June, Condor Rebel 2 only received $28 million in box office in more than 2,100 theaters for 3 weeks. The failure was a foregone conclusion. Of course, the success of the movie was to everyone's delight. However, the unexpected failure of the sequel was such a complete failure. Therefore, a large number of shareholders wrote to the Fox board of directors, condemning Fox's management for abandoning Eric and developing the sequel of Condor Rebel 2 alone, which led to a devastating blow to this promising film series. Condor Rebel 2 was not the only one. In the first month of the summer, the films released by the major film companies did not perform well. Usually, at this time, the total weekly box office in North America should have exceeded $100 million. However, until the week before Toy Story was released, the weekly box office was only $80 million. Of course, everyone knew the reason very well. On June 21st, Toy Story, which had experienced overwhelming publicity and a good reputation, opened in 2,400 theaters in North America. Before that, Toy Story had already accumulated more than $1.5 million in box office through small-scale pre-screenings. Although this number was a bit insignificant, it averaged a staggering $50,000 in less than 30 theaters. Because there was no competition during the summer, Toy Story received $30 million in box office in the first 3 days. A week later, the box office accumulated to $47 million, easily exceeding the production cost of the film. As the first 3D animated film, Toy Story, achieved such amazing results as soon as it debuted, causing a huge sensation in Hollywood and even the entire world. Pixar, which had been unknown, quickly became the focus of attention throughout Hollywood. Many professional magazines evaluated that with the potential shown by Toy Story, if it chose to go public, the animation studio's market value would not be less than $1 billion. The media quickly dug up the story of Eric buying Pixar from Jobs for $20 million. At this time, Jobs was still struggling to run his next computer company. When a reporter suddenly appeared in front of him and asked him how he felt, Jobs did not say a word. However, in private, Jobs quickly called Eric in Punk City. After congratulating Eric, Boss Chow did not hesitate to seize the opportunity and asked Eric to provide an order for next. After Toy Story, Pixar would definitely expand again, and Jobs' computer company also produced professional-grade computers. When he heard Jobs' request, Eric readily agreed without hesitation. He regarded it as an investment in Apple in advance for the future, although Jobs' character did not expect him to appreciate it. As the future world's largest company by market value, Eric did not intend to let go of Apple from the beginning. However, now was not the best time to intervene in Apple. Eric did not have enough funds and energy for the time being. A week after the release of Toy Story, on June 28, after a huge premiere, Throat Island was also released in 2,500 theaters in North America. Compared to Toy Story, which had a large number of pre-screenings and accumulated word of mouth, Throat Island only had a few public test screenings, although it had invested $35 million in various publicity channels. The media and film critics who had a good relationship with Disney were invited. After receiving benefits from Disney, these people certainly could not say anything bad about Throat Island, but it was also impossible for them to brag about the movie with great fanfare. If they did, they would be slapped in the face in the future. Therefore, the focus of the film reviews about Throat Island in the newspaper was basically focused on the grand scenes and beautiful scenery of the movie. As for the plot, well, not many people were willing to talk about it. Although the news that Terminator 2 had an investment of 100 million yuan was the first to come out, Throat Island was the first Hollywood blockbuster to be released with an investment of more than 100 million yuan. Therefore, on the day of the movie's release, a large number of fans walked into the cinema with great expectations for the movie. Therefore, on the first day of the movie's release, Throat Island took $9 million at the box office. But then the situation took a turn for the worse. After the movie was released, Disney could no longer control the public opinion of Throat Island. The next day, there was a one-sided crusade against Throat Island in the media. Many famous film critics even unceremoniously put forward sharp criticisms, saying that Throat Island was expensive visual garbage piled up by $100 million. Some ordinary fans who were interviewed after watching the movie expressed extreme disappointment with Throat Island, claiming that it was a scattered comic book without a plot. The film industry in North America has developed for nearly 100 years. Because of the low ticket prices, watching movies in the United States was a very civilian entertainment activity. In addition, there were many choices, so it meant that there was not much room for bad movies to survive in this mature market. Therefore, on the second day of release, the box office of Throat Island took a sharp turn and fell to more than $5 million. On the third day, it fell again to only $3 million. In the first 3 days, Throat Island received $17 million at the box office. If one did not look at the box office trend, this result was not too miserable. However, 3 days later, the attendance of Throat Island had fallen to the point where it was almost forced to be removed. After the first week, the total box office of Throat Island accumulated $20 million. In other words, in 4 working days, the movie only received a pitiful $3 million at the box office. In the second week, 1,000 cinemas had already pulled the movie out of theaters. The remaining 1,500 cinemas had signed a 2-week screening contract with Disney, so they had no choice but to grit their teeth and hold on. Perhaps it was because the quality of Throat Island was too poor, and the early publicity aimed at Toy Story and Terminator 2 aroused the reverse psychology of the audience. While the reputation and box office of Throat Island fell into the abyss, the box office of Toy Story did not fall in the second week of release. Instead, it increased. At the end of the second week, Toy Story once again received more than $49 million at the box office. Although there were no blockbusters released during the summer, this result of almost breaking $100 million in 2 weeks made many people gasp again. Terminator 2 had also been promoted with the gimmick of costing more than $100 million. This time, the fans seemed to have become more cautious. Therefore, on the first day of Terminator 2 release on July 3rd, the box office was not very good, only about $8 million. However, Cameron's carefully crafted thrilling plot and the appearance of the liquid metal robot made Terminator 2 quickly win a lot of praise. After $8 million on the first day, it received $14 million and $11 million in the next 2 days. The total score of $33 million over the weekend even surpassed the previous Toy Story. As for Throat Island, it once again received more than $5 million at the box office in the second week. Then, it was collectively removed and completely swept into the ranks of Hollywood's worst movies. After 2 weeks of release, Throat Island brought in a total of $25 million in revenue. The total investment in the production and distribution of this movie reached $140 million. Because of the one-sided bad reviews, the overseas distribution of Throat Island was also a failure. The income from videotapes and television broadcast rights was almost zero. Therefore, Disney and Robert Shea would jointly bear a huge loss of up to $120 million. Chapter 427. When the news that Cutthroat Island caused a huge loss of $120 million was revealed, although Disney only lost more than $70 million, the impact was more severe than Disney's loss of $100 million through multiple movies during the summer vacation last year. In just 3 days, Disney's stock price fell by 11%, and its market value shrank from $3.8 billion before the release of Cutthroat Island to $3.45 billion. There were also a lot of discussions and reflections on the pros and cons of big-budget movies in the newspapers and media. They made a detailed comparison between Cutthroat Island and Terminator 2. One of the two movies failed miserably at the box office while the other was a big success. The contrast was very stark. As the discussion progressed, it gradually involved movies with a large investment of more than $50 million in the past 2 years. Of course, there was also an analysis of Tornado, which was being produced by Eric, and Captain Hawk, which was directed by Spielberg. Because both of them were the most successful commercial film directors in Hollywood in recent years, the investment of these two movies also exceeded $70 million. When the box office of Terminator 2 was released on the first weekend, Eric had already completed all the shooting work for Tornado. When he saw that the box office of Cutthroat Island exceeded $20 million, Eric was very disappointed. The miracle did not happen after all. However, he was not too surprised. In the original universe, the status of Carlock, an independent production company, was far inferior to that of Disney, one of the Seven Giants. In addition, Carlock was jointly suppressed by the Seven Giants, resulting in the tragic situation where the $90 million investment of Throat Cutter Island only got more than $9 million box office. Eric only regretted that the loss of more than $120 million in this version of Cutthroat Island was not all borne by Disney. Otherwise, the subsequent acquisition of Disney would be smoother. After the closure of Tornado, Eric continued to stay in Oklahoma for a few days to deal with some trivial matters before returning to Los Angeles with several main creators. In the distant Punk City, Eric had already felt the storm of public opinion caused by several summer movies in the media. When the flight arrived in Los Angeles, Eric, Jeffrey, Joanna, and others had just walked out of the airport when they were blocked by dozens of reporters who had been waiting for a long time at the entrance of the pickup hall. Looking at the frantically flashing camera flashes around him and the tape recorders trying to reach past the bodyguards, Eric was worried that the situation would get out of control. He quickly pressed his hands, stopped, and made a gesture to be quiet. The group of reporters who were originally worried that Eric would leave directly and asked loudly while expecting a response quickly quieted down. Since Eric promised to answer their questions, there was no need to do so. "Everyone, I can stay and answer some questions, but after a few hours on the plane, my companions are very tired. Can you let them leave first?" They didn't expect Eric to suddenly mention this. Everyone looked at each other. Eric didn't want to get an affirmative answer. He made a few gestures to Jeffrey and others, then signaled his bodyguards to push through the crowd. When the reporters saw that Eric didn't move, they sensibly made way. Watching Jeffrey, Joanna, and others get into the car on the side of the road, Eric clapped his hands. So, the group of reporters immediately became noisy again. "Stop one by one," Eric said, pointing to a female reporter in a black suit and glasses. "This lady, you go first." The female reporter was a little excited and wanted to take a step forward, but she was stopped by the bodyguards. She had to say loudly across the human wall, "Mr. Williams, it is rumored that you were the first to take a fancy to the script of Throat Cutter Island. What do you think about the dismal box office of this movie with an investment of more than $100 million? Before Eric came back, he had already thought about his response to this question. Of course, he couldn't admit that this was a trap. Therefore, when he heard the female reporter's question, Eric showed a heavy look. Throat Cutter Island was originally a very good idea. I even thought of making this movie into a trilogy. It's a pity that Disney went astray and ruined this promising story. I can only say that it's a pity." Before Eric finished speaking, the female reporter immediately seized the opportunity and asked again, "Can you talk about your production ideas?" "Sorry, it's not convenient for me to disclose this question." "Next, this gentleman." The reporter who was named immediately said, "Mr. Williams, since you already have an idea for Throat Cutter Island, is it possible for you to remake this series in the future? The failure of this movie has already given the audience a preconceived notion. Forget about remaking this movie. I estimate that no one will dare to make a pirate movie in the next 10 years. Even you don't dare?" Eric nodded. "Yes, I don't dare either. The failure of Throat Cutter Island is too thorough. It's too big a blow to the pirate genre. Although I'm not afraid of failure, I don't want to experience failure so soon." "Next you." A black-haired reporter tiptoed and stretched the tape recorder forward a little, and said, "Mr. Williams, it seems that you have already experienced failure. It is said that you personally selected the script of the Condor Rebel series and even participated in the investment." Eric smiled and explained, "The first script of Condor Rebel was indeed selected by me personally, and I also participated in part of the investment. However, the second one has nothing to do with me. I haven't even seen the script. You can investigate this matter." "Didn't Miss Connolly show the script to you?" a thin reporter hurriedly interjected, and everyone's eyes suddenly lit up, looking forward to Eric's answer. Of course, Eric knew that this question was actually testing his relationship with Connolly. The smile on his face didn't change at all, but he didn't say anything superfluous. He directly replied, "No." "Next, you go ahead. This is the last question." "I'm in a hurry." The reporter was about to speak, but when he heard Eric's words, he swallowed the original question back. He thought about it and asked, "Mr. Williams, Toy Story, and Terminator 2 have once again achieved such brilliant results. Will you take the opportunity to list Firefly?" "No, Firefly's cash flow is very abundant, so there is no need for listing financing. And after listing, in order to maintain the stock price and maintain the confidence of investors, Firefly may have to make some radical decisions that are contrary to the company's development strategy. This is very detrimental to the company's development, so I still hope that Firefly can develop more freely in an environment that is not disturbed by external investors." After answering this question, Eric nodded to the crowd, then squeezed through the crowd and walked out under the protection of a group of bodyguards. Although Eric did not answer many questions, it was enough for these reporters to write a good report, so no one tried to stop him. Eric quickly left the Los Angeles airport. Trilogy, hee. At this point, you still don't want to let go of the opportunity to annoy Michael Eisner. The next day, Chris Hansen, who came from New York, said as soon as he saw Eric. He had obviously seen the interview with Eric yesterday. Eric shook hands with Chris and walked side by side with him to the Sharp Corner Manor. He said, "Throat Cutter Island got $20 million in box office, which is much more than I expected. Of course, I have to take the opportunity to vent. A $140 million investment. I felt a chill when I saw the final box office of $20 million. You actually think it's too much?" "Unfortunately, Robert Shea bore part of the loss," the two said as they walked into the villa. Beside the glass wall of Freedom City, Chris sat on the sofa and looked at Eric making coffee at the small bar not far away. He said, "You're still alone now. Don't you feel that this villa is too empty?" Eric walked over with the coffee pot, poured coffee for the two, and said, "Different habits. I prefer this feeling." Chris took the coffee cup, looked at Eric and said, "I don't know if it's my illusion. Although I haven't spent much time with you, I feel like you're always separated from the world around you by a layer. You're very good at getting along with people, and your ability to deal with people is far beyond the level of your age. However, you're always like a little oil in the water. Although you're in close contact with the water, you're unwilling to blend in." Eric was stunned for a moment, but he did not refute. He smiled and said, "Your intuition is really sharp." Chris was a little surprised to hear Eric admit it so casually, but then he said, "Eric, this is not a good phenomenon. In the long run, it may even lead to schizophrenia." You're a finance major, right?" "I took psychology as an elective." Many finance students take psychology as an elective. This way, they can more thoroughly analyze the opponents or customers they encounter. "Forget it, Chris. Let's get down to business. Don't worry, I definitely won't have schizophrenia, but I don't know how to explain it to you." Chris was stunned and said, "Okay, but Eric, you have to know that everyone cares about you. My father, me, Drew, and your women. If you have something in your heart that you want to talk about, I believe that any one of us is a very good listener." How could he confide his secrets to others? Even if it was Drew, Eric could not imagine how that girl would react if she knew his secret. After saying this, Chris went straight to the point. "Okay, let's talk about the acquisition of Disney." Chris took out the documents that he brought with him and gave Eric a copy. He said, The latest stock market value of Disney today is $3.43 billion US, and the debt is $2.07 billion US. So far, I have a total of 11% of Disney's shares through several companies and agents, and the total expenditure is $376 million US. Disney's share in the stock market is about 24%, so I can still take in some more. Disney's board of directors, including Michael Eisner, has a total of 16 people. Disney changes the board of directors through elections every year. If the goodwill offer is rejected, we can get 2 board seats through this year's election and the subsequent acquisition of Disney's shares. This way, we can intervene in the management of Disney. Eric said, "Let's talk about the main obstacles in this acquisition, other than the problem of money." Chris smiled. "That's what I want to say the most. Some of the information I collected surprised me. After the hostile takeover in 1984, Disney lost more than $300 million US, but they did not learn from it at all. They did not even have the most common anti-takeover poison pill agreement." Poison pill? Eric showed a puzzled expression. Chris thought for a moment, and then tried to explain in simple terms. The so-called poison pill is a kind of stock expansion agreement that the acquired company drafted in advance to prevent hostile takeovers. Once the company encounters a hostile takeover, the poison pill agreement will be triggered. When the company's outstanding shares are bought by the opponent, the shareholders of the target company can dilute the share of the opponent's shares by issuing new shares. Through this method, the acquisition cost can be raised to a sky-high price, like a poison pill, making the acquirers who want to annex the target company hesitate. At least 2,000 listed companies in North America have the poison pill agreement, but what surprised me was that Disney did not have it. Eric listened to Chris's explanation and smiled. "All in all, this is very good for us, isn't it?" "Of course." Chris then put down another page of information in his hand and said, "However, although Disney's performance in the past 2 years has been relatively poor, and Throat Cutter Island has brought such a big loss, Disney was brought out of the mire of decline by Michael Eisner. In the past 7 years, Disney's value has doubled under Michael Eisner's hands. At least half of the shareholders still have confidence in Michael Eisner. Therefore, the biggest problem with our acquisition is still the existing management of Disney." Eric certainly knew this. According to his fragmented memories, the huge disagreement between Disney's shareholders and Michael Eisner should have happened after 1996. Michael Eisner stubbornly annexed ABC TV, causing Disney's high debt ratio and huge losses in the following years. Before that, although Michael Eisner was headstrong and self-opinionated and even treated the board of directors as if he had the final say, and he also sought a lot of private benefits for himself through the compensation committee, Disney had been thriving and developing rapidly, so these problems were tolerated by the shareholders. However, Eric couldn't wait until 1996. At that time, the market value of Disney was estimated to have multiplied several times. It would be even more difficult to acquire it. Chris didn't know Eric's thoughts and continued, "Once Disney agrees to a friendly acquisition, many things will be much simpler. However, I think Michael Eisner, who controls the board of directors, will definitely not agree. The possibility of taking the second path is more than 70%. Therefore, the most important thing for us now is to consider the various obstacles that may be encountered in the second path." Chapter 428. It was already 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Outside the glass wall of the City of Freedom, the setting sun dyed the horizon a magnificent orange-red. Eric and Chris were still in their original seats, as if they had not moved for the whole day. It had been half a year since Eric made up his mind to acquire Disney. In the past 6 months, in addition to secretly absorbing Disney shares, Chris had also done a lot of detailed research on the entire Disney Group, including Disney shareholders, creditors, and the attitude of these people towards Disney's management, as well as detailed information on the various assets under the Disney Group. Just this data investigation alone cost Chris millions of dollars. It could even be said that no one knew Disney better than Chris now. For the whole day, Eric maintained the attitude of a listener most of the time and raised his own questions from time to time. Chris always patiently answered Eric's questions. When the sun had completely sunk into the horizon, the discussion was almost done. Chris finally said, Throat Cut Island, has just been completed. Because of the huge losses, Disney shareholders and creditors are most dissatisfied with the management now. It is also the best time for us to launch an acquisition, so we will try to launch an acquisition offer in a week. We need a week to consolidate the scattered Disney shares in our hands and set up an acquisition team. By the way, I forgot to mention this just now. Eric was holding a list of Disney movies that would be released in the second half of the year. He raised his head and asked, "What is it?" Firefly doesn't have enough manpower to set up a professional acquisition team, so I want to cooperate with Morgan Stanley. You know, I have a certain number of contacts in Morgan Stanley, and they have a ready-made corporate acquisition team. They can take care of all acquisition matters such as asset evaluation, legal affairs, price negotiations, and other acquisition matters. Eric said, "That's not a problem." Chris said again, "In fact, you should have heard that Michael Ovitz led a team from CAA to help Panasonic acquire the ball and finally got a commission of $70 million US. Morgan Stanley's team won't be cheap." Eric laughed and said, "Everyone knows that the Japanese are fat lambs who are willing to be slaughtered, but we are not. How much would it cost to hire Morgan Stanley's team?" Based on the calculation of a 100-man team, I estimate that it will cost $50 million US. Once a hostile takeover is initiated, it will take at least half a year to complete the acquisition. "It might even take a year or two," Chris said as he looked at Eric, waiting for his decision. Although Disney's current market value was only slightly more than $3 billion USD, the final acquisition would involve no less than $5 billion USD. Morgan Stanley would take a 1% commission, which was very reasonable because Eric vaguely remembered that these big investment banks would charge a commission of more than 10% to assist the shareholders of listed companies in selling their shares. Thinking of this, Eric quickly made a decision and said, "Then let's hire Morgan Stanley's team. Also, tell the person in charge of Morgan Stanley that if they can complete the acquisition within half a year, I will increase their remuneration by 30% on top of the original commission." For corporate mergers and acquisitions, the longer the delay, the more variables there would be, and the higher the price to pay would be. Many hostile takeovers were eventually left unsettled after a long delay. Therefore, not only did Chris not dissuade Eric from making this suggestion, he even praised Eric's decisiveness. "I will pass on this condition to Morgan Stanley." In the following week, while Chris was secretly making the final arrangements, Eric did not stay out of it. With the box office of Toy Story successfully breaking the 100 million mark on the first day of release in the third week, and the box office of Terminator 2 continued to climb. Professional box office statistics agencies estimated the total box office of these two movies at $200 million US in North America. Having two movies that broke the 200 million mark in the summer was enough to make all the studios in Hollywood jealous. Therefore, Firefly Films held a grand celebration party at Eric's Pointy Corner Manor. This was the third time that the Pointy Corner Manor held a large-scale party, and unlike the usual low-profile party, Eric not only invited a large number of Hollywood stars and senior executives of the film company, but he also allowed dozens of media reporters to come to the party for interviews. All of this was to build momentum for the upcoming acquisition. The greater the influence of Firefly, the more advantageous it would be for the acquisition. In just 1 week, not only were the box office results of Terminator 2 and Toy Story widely publicized, but Throat Cutter Island and Fox's Condor 2 were also targeted again. Eric intended to make a wholly owned acquisition like Sony and Panasonic from the beginning, and he did not intend to use Firefly's shares to exchange for the shares in the hands of Disney's shareholders. Therefore, this series of events was not to make Disney's investors confident in Firefly and sell their shares. In many newspaper articles, Eric had been expressing a point of view. If they did not sell, Disney would continue to make bad movies like Throat Cutter Island or Condor 2, and they would also be attacked by Firefly. Of course, although many people were keenly aware of the confrontation, it was not until Firefly submitted an acquisition offer to Disney that people realized the meaning of Eric's previous remarks. July 22, 1991, Monday. Michael Eisner did not take the slightest break over the weekend. Because of the box office failure of Throat Cutter Island, he had been trying to appease Disney shareholders and creditors for more than half a month. Eric's so-called Throat Cutter Island trilogy made Michael Eisner gnash his teeth in anger. A short sentence made his situation worse. A large number of shareholders accused Michael Eisner of willfully giving up a good cooperative relationship with Eric. Michael Eisner also had his own difficulties. Of course, he wanted to cooperate with Eric, but after the storm last year, it was difficult for the two sides to cooperate again. After breakfast in the villa in Malibu, Michael Eisner did not go to Disney's headquarters. He had already asked someone to buy a plane ticket. Today, he was going to visit Disney's current largest shareholder, the Bass family in Texas. Disney had developed to the present, and the Disney family, who created the Disney brand, was no longer a major shareholder of Disney. At present, the Disney Family Foundation only owned about 3% of Disney's shares. The Bass family, who made their fortune through oil, gradually acquired 16% of Disney's shares in the 1970s and 1980s, becoming Disney's largest shareholder. In 1984, it was with the support of the Bass family and the Disney family's founding father, Roy Disney, that Michael Eisner was able to sit in the position of Disney's CEO. The driver drove Michael Eisner to the Los Angeles airport. A small private jet had already been prepared. This was one of the benefits of Michael Eisner as the chairman of the board and CEO of Disney. After the plane took off, Michael Eisner said a few words to his assistant and planned to go to the lounge to rest for a while. It took more than 2 hours to fly from Los Angeles to Austin, the capital of Texas. These days, he had been dealing with various problems caused by the box office failure of Throat Cutter Island. He had been physically and mentally exhausted. Not long after he fell asleep, there was a knock on the door of the cabin lounge. The assistant's voice was a little hurried. Mr. Eisner, Mr. Wales is calling for an urgent matter. Michael Eisner, who was suddenly woken up, frowned and got up to walk out of the lounge. The assistant looked at Michael Eisner's gloomy expression, handed over the cordless phone, and explained softly, "I said you were resting, but Mr. Wales said it was urgent." Michael Eisner nodded expressionlessly, took the phone, and closed the door of the lounge. He turned to sit on the sofa, poured himself a glass of red wine, and asked, "Frank, what's the matter?" On the other side of the phone, Disney's president, Frank Wales, spoke in a hurried tone. It took Michael Eisner more than a minute to react. The red wine in the goblet had overflowed. However, Michael Eisner was no longer in the mood to care about this. He put the empty red wine bottle on the table, hung up the phone, and walked out of the lounge. He shouted to his assistant, "Nick, inform the captain that the plane will return immediately after landing. Return to Los Angeles." Near noon, Michael Eisner finally returned to Disney's headquarters. The Disney board members who had received the notice were already waiting in the conference room in advance. Sitting at the head of the conference table, Michael Eisner read through the acquisition plan submitted by Firefly in detail without saying a word. He cursed in a low voice before asking Frank Wales, "Frank, are you sure this isn't a joke? Where did Firefly get the funds to buy Disney? How can they have so much money?" Looking at Michael Eisner, who looked agitated and could jump up at any time, Frank Wales patiently explained, "I have already called Eric Williams personally to confirm this matter." "I'm asking where they got the money?" Michael Eisner's voice had already turned into a roar. Frank Wales shook his head in a good temper. Michael Eisner was about to continue his outburst when a board member sitting below suddenly probed, "Could it be the oil crisis from before?" Michael Eisner was suddenly stunned. Thinking of Eric's various actions in July and August last year, he quickly confirmed this point. At that time, Eric had raised a total of $700 million. It had been almost a year since the incident. Eric didn't do anything eye-catching before, so everyone thought that Eric didn't make much money that time. But seeing the acquisition offer in front of him, Michael Eisner realized that everyone had been deceived by Eric. Clenching his fist with an ugly expression, Michael Eisner looked up and said, "Now, let's talk about what to do. If Eric Williams succeeds in the acquisition, then all of us here may have to pack up and leave. So, we must not let him succeed." The conference room was soon filled with discussions. The 16 directors of Disney were either on good terms with Michael Eisner or former executives of Disney. Because of Michael Eisner's monopolization of power, the power of these people was greatly weakened. However, these directors didn't care about this. Anyway, If Disney made a major decision mistake, Michael Eisner would definitely be the scapegoat, just like Throat Cutter Island. Therefore, no one would be dissatisfied with this kind of high-paying job that didn't require responsibility. They didn't want to lose their jobs because of the acquisition. The most important thing now is to stabilize the shareholders. As long as they stand with us, it's unlikely that Firefly wants to acquire Disney. Sigh, it's a pity that Throat Cutter Island has just caused such a big loss. Firefly seized the opportunity very well. Don't forget that there are still creditors. Last week, we just discussed the plan to postpone the payment of the principal and interest of the matured bonds. Now, this plan definitely can't be brought out again. Otherwise, the creditors will definitely favor Firefly and put pressure on us. After all, Firefly's performance is too good. Firefly already has 11% of the shares in their hands. This is a big problem. The discussion in the conference room buzzed for a full 5 minutes. Michael Eisner couldn't hear any useful suggestions from these people, which made him very angry. He even ignored the fact that this situation was caused by him. In order to consolidate his power, of course, the more mediocre people on the board of directors, the better. Ignoring the nonsense of these people, Michael Eisner said to his assistant, "Call all the management for a meeting. In addition, let the legal department send a letter to Firefly saying that we refuse the acquisition." "Mr. Eisner, according to the procedure, we should disclose this to the shareholders," the assistant reminded softly. Michael Eisner glared at the assistant with dissatisfaction. "You just have to do what you should do." The assistant responded with a guilty conscience and left silently. Michael Eisner patted the table to stop the discussion and said, "Okay, stop arguing. Let's wait for the management to come and discuss again." The group of directors quieted down. On the day that Firefly submitted the acquisition offer to the board of directors of Disney, the board of directors of Disney rejected Firefly's acquisition offer. At the same time, they selectively submitted plans related to Firefly to the many shareholders of Disney. In just 3 days, while Disney rejected Firefly's acquisition plan, they quickly passed the first plan to prevent hostile acquisitions, the Golden Parachute Plan. The so-called Golden Parachute was an agreement signed in advance to protect the management of a company that was subject to a hostile acquisition. It stipulated that once the target company was successfully acquired, all the original senior management of the target company would face forced layoffs and the acquirer would pay a huge amount of compensation. Obviously, in the face of a hostile acquisition, Michael Eisner's first thought was his own interests. 3 days later, Firefly held a press conference and officially proposed a public acquisition of Disney Pictures. As a shareholder of Disney, they asked the management of Disney to immediately disclose the financial situation of Disney to the public investors. Chapter 429. Although due to the pressure exerted by Firefly as a shareholder of Disney, the management of Disney delayed the release of Disney's latest financial report to investors for a whole week. Because of 2 consecutive years of poor performance, Michael Eisner did not release quarterly financial reports as usual. Instead, he used a large amount of space to review the overall development of Disney since Michael Eisner became CEO in 1984. He focused on the fact that Disney's market value grew at a rate of 27% per year before 1990. He emphasized that the failure of several movies such as Throat Cutter Island and last year's The Rocket Expert were just accidental events. In addition to the film department, Disney's radio and television business, theme parks and resorts, and consumer product development business were all bringing stable profits to the company. Therefore, the failure of several movies would not hurt Disney. At the end of the report, Michael Eisner confidently guaranteed that the film and television department of Disney would be reformed. The company would soon return to the development speed of a few years ago. He called on Disney shareholders to stand on his side and resist Firefly's hostile takeover. In the face of Michael Eisner's attempt to downplay Disney's recent financial situation, Firefly quickly counterattacked and exposed an insider article on the production process of Throat Cutter Island in the New York Post. According to the crew of Throat Cutter Island, during the production process of the movie, from script revision to post-editing, Michael Eisner had to be personally involved in everything. Even the set style of the movie and the costume design of the actors had to be approved by Michael Eisner. It was Michael Eisner's rude intervention in the shooting of Throatcutter Island that caused director Rennie Harlin to be unable to give full play to his directing concept, which eventually led to the failure of Throatcutter Island. From this, it can be seen that Michael Eisner is a micromanager. This management style, in the case of a manager's expanding power, will strongly limit the enthusiasm of specific personnel in charge, causing the truly talented people to seek other jobs, leaving those mediocre people who only know how to figure out the thoughts of the superiors. There is no doubt that Michael Eisner has made great contributions to the company in the first few years, but from the development of Disney in the past 2 years, Michael Eisner's headstrong management style has begun to show drawbacks. In the long run, it will cause immeasurable losses to Disney. After the article was published, Michael Eisner's agent immediately responded, claiming that the report of the New York Post was a slander against Michael Eisner. Michael Eisner reserved the right to sue for this slander. There was a lot of commotion in the media, but the real battlefield was somewhere the public couldn't see. In the conference room of Firefly's headquarters in Burbank, the head of Morgan Stanley's acquisition team, Bernie Sanders, was discussing the specific acquisition strategy after Disney's board of directors rejected the goodwill acquisition. In 1984, when Saul Sternberg made a hostile acquisition against Disney, Disney finally used a counter-acquisition strategy of paying a blackmail ransom and redeemed Saul Sternberg's shares worth less than $200 million with a huge sum of $300 million. But this time is different from the past. Disney's shareholders are obviously taking a wait-and-see approach to the acquisition of Firefly. So far, most shareholders have only agreed to Michael Eisner's Golden Parachute agreement, because this agreement will not harm their interests. The agreement states that once the acquisition is successful, if 76 senior executives of Disney are forced to leave within 2 years, Firefly will have to pay a total compensation of $500 million. Eric asked, "What if I only want Michael Eisner to leave alone?" Bernie Sanders looked at the information in his hand and replied, "Michael Eisner first proposed the scorched earth strategy. If any of the 76 senior executives were to be fired, the other 75 would take the initiative to leave as revenge, turning Disney's management into a barren, scorched earth." But Disney's management did not agree with Michael Eisner's proposal, and the board of directors did not approve it. So, if only Michael Eisner leaves, Firefly will have to pay Michael Eisner $30 million. $30 million. So little? Eric could not help but ask. He remembered that in his previous life, Michael Ovitz had only worked at Disney for a little more than a year. When he was forced to leave the position of CEO, he took a total of $100 million in compensation. Chris, who was sitting next to Eric, rolled his eyes. "Eric, Michael Eisner's current annual salary is $750,000. $30 million is equivalent to 40 years of Michael Eisner's annual salary. Do you think it's little?" Eric was puzzled. What about options and dividends? According to the agreement that Michael Eisner signed with Disney in 1984, he would only receive options and dividends based on his performance after working at Disney for 5 years. At the beginning of last year, Disney's board of directors officially approved the corresponding plan. Chris seemed to be gloating. But then, Disney's performance took a turn for the worse. Last year's summer movies caused losses of up to $100 million. In 1990, Disney's other sources of income not only made up for this loss, but also had to pay off $150 million of matured debt and interest. In the end, Disney could only barely break even, and there was no way to talk about options and dividends. After Chris finished speaking, Bernie Sanders added, "But I have to remind you, Eric. Other than Michael Eisner, 18 of the 75 senior executives have a very close relationship with Michael Eisner. They can be said to be his confidants. The total compensation for these people is $220 million. Eric glanced at Michael Lynn, who was sitting not far away. He did not care too much. After the acquisition, he would make the corresponding arrangements based on the performance of these people. Just like the senior executives left behind from New Line, most of them were now the backbone of Firefly. No one would say no to the high salary and benefits. These things can be considered after the acquisition is completed. I still hope that the current management of Disney can be kept intact. Of course, Mr. Michael Eisner definitely can't stay in his original position. Bernie Sanders nodded, turned a page of the document in his hand, and said, "In addition, Eric, according to our team's evaluation, the acquisition plan is not the best choice. If we only get the controlling shares of Disney, based on Firefly's excellent performance in movies, most of Disney's shareholders will be happy to sell some of their shares, and the price will be much lower." Eric shook his head and said, "Bernie, I once said that I don't want the development of the company to be interfered with by external investors. Also, I hope that Disney can be privatized so that it can be integrated with Firefly." Bernie Sanders was just abiding by his professional ethics to provide more professional advice to Eric. Seeing that Eric was firm, he did not persuade him and continued to talk about other topics. After this meeting, Firefly immediately held a press conference. The CEO of Firefly Films, Michael Lin, made the first official offer to Disney. He would buy Disney at the price of 20% premium of Disney's shares on the day of Firefly's public acquisition. At Disney's headquarters, also in Burbank, Michael Eisner sat in his office chair, looking at the latest offer of Firefly that had just been sent by his secretary. He said to Frank Wales, the president of Disney, on the other side, for $2 billion. The first offer is 20% premium. I don't know what Firefly's bottom line is. Frank Wales looked at Michael Eisner's obviously deep eye sockets and did not know how to answer. Michael Eisner also seemed to be talking to himself, not expecting an answer. In the week that Firefly issued the acquisition offer, Michael Eisner had been visiting more than 30 investment institutions and creditors day and night, hoping to get support. However, the situation this time was completely different from the attitude of the shareholders in 1984 when they faced the hostile acquisition of Wall Street tycoon Saul Steinberg. Many investors were looking forward to this acquisition, so they did not give Michael Eisner any promises. Some of the strong anti-acquisition measures could not be implemented at all. Although Michael Eisner chose to be vague in announcing the financial report, most investors knew very well that Disney's film business had been going downhill in the past 2 years. Even if Disney's other businesses were still bringing in stable profits, as a film company, developing excellent films was always the most important cornerstone of the company. Without enough hot movies to support it, the Disney parks and Disney stores all over the world would not be able to launch new projects and products. The ratings of Disney's TV stations, which relied on Disney content, would also decline. And Firefly, which was very strong in film and television content, was strong enough to cover up its channel disadvantage, and Disney, which had perfect channels, could form a perfect complementary effect. This complementary effect became more obvious after the success of Pixar's Toy Story. Although Firefly did not announce its financial report, as an acquirer, it took the initiative to disclose some of its business to Disney. Frank Wales had specially read the relevant information of Toy Story. In addition to the movie's box office that had now exceeded $100 million, the sales of the licensed toys had also reached $40 million in just a month. It was important to know that the cycle of toy sales was much longer than the cycle of movie release. Even if the movie was removed from the movie, through measures such as the distribution of videotapes and broadcast on TV, it could still stimulate the sales of toys. Although it could not be compared to the scale of Star Wars, which had tens of billions of USD, through the licensing of various channels, the profits of this animation in the next few years would be much higher than the profits in the box office and videotape distribution. The development of animated movie peripherals had always been Disney's forte. In the United States alone, Disney had more than 300 Disney stores. Frank Wales had gotten someone to do a simple evaluation. If the peripherals of Toy Story were to be developed by Disney, the profits would be increased by at least 30%. It was impossible for Disney's shareholders to not see what he could see. If Firefly's acquisition plan was to choose a controlling stake in Disney instead of a full-fledged acquisition, perhaps most of the shareholders would have already leaned towards Firefly. Frank Wales waited for a while. Seeing that Michael Eisner did not speak again, he had to take the initiative to say, "This acquisition can't be completed in a short period of time. If Disney's New Year's movie performs well, it might be able to regain the shareholders' support. I'm not Eric Williams. Where can I find?" Michael Eisner stopped halfway, unwilling to mention Eric's name again. He continued, "I went to see a few movie samples yesterday. The confirmed release date of Beauty and the Beast and the remake of Elizabeth Taylor's new father-in-law are good, but the quality of Robert Benton's The Storm of Courage is just passable. This movie cost $48 million, which is the sum of the previous two movies, but everyone who has seen it thinks that this movie is worse than Throat Cutter Island. I'm wondering if we should change the release date to next year's summer. It's best if we change the schedule. We can't let this movie affect this matter again. After Frank Wales said that, he suddenly thought of something and said, I remember that back then, Righteous Courage invited Nicole Kidman to be the female lead, but she rejected it. Eric Williams's lover? Yes, if we had realized this earlier, perhaps we would have been more cautious about the project of The Storm of Courage. Maybe it's just a coincidence. Michael Eisner waved his hand in annoyance. Stop talking about him. As the two were talking, the phone on the desk rang. Michael Eisner picked up the receiver, and the secretary on the other end said, Mr. Eisner, I just received a call. The other party said that he's Sam Lei Shedong. Do you need me to bring him in? Sam Lei Shedong. Viacom's Sam Lei Shedong? Michael Eisner confirmed. Frank Wales also pricked up his ears when he heard the name. The secretary on the other end gave a definite answer. Michael Eisner seemed to realize something and quickly said, Bring him in. With that said, Michael Eisner looked at Frank Wales and pressed the hands-free button on the landline so that Frank Wales could hear their conversation. Soon, an old but energetic voice came from the landline. In the villa in Malibu's Sharp Corner Manor, Eric sat on the sofa in the living room and looked at the list of Disney's movies that were in production and about to be released. Frank Wales could think of the importance of the new year to Disney, and so could Eric. He was considering how to attack Disney's movies at the end of the year. Among the movies that were in production, the peak of 2D animation, The Lion King, had yet to appear. However, another movie, Aladdin, had already been approved and was in the midst of production. In addition, among the movies that were about to be released at the end of the year, Eric saw two movies that he was familiar with, Braveheart and Beauty and the Beast. Eric's deepest impression of Braveheart was Nicole's scenes. As for the plot, there was nothing to say. It was an ambitious movie that wanted to imitate The Godfather and Once Upon a Time in America, but it ended up being neither fish nor fowl, with no highlights. Eric put more attention on Beauty and the Beast. In the original space-time, Beauty and the Beast was the first animated movie in the history of the Oscars to be nominated for Best Picture. Although the information in his hand showed that the premiere of this movie was only in 900 theaters, Eric didn't dare to let his guard down. If the sequel to The Kid was still produced by Firefly, releasing it at the same time as Beauty and the Beast was a good way to attack. Fox had already started production on The Kid 3, but it hadn't announced the release date. According to the schedule of the first two movies, The Kid 3 might still be released on Thanksgiving Day, the same as Beauty and the Beast. However, who knew if Fox would change its mind? Maybe he could find a time to test it out. Eric was thinking about putting Jim Carrey's Dumb and Melon on Thanksgiving Day when Nicole walked out of the bathroom. Seeing Eric staring at her, Nicole, who was wiping her wet hair with a towel, asked, "What are you looking at?" "Legs." Nicole rolled her eyes at Eric and walked over to sit beside him. She curiously looked at the information in Eric's hands. She knew that the things Eric looked at outside the study were usually not confidential information, so she didn't have any scruples. Eric reached out and pointed at the information. "Do you know about The Storm of Courage?" "Yes, I received a contract for this script. I can work with Dustin Hoffman and Bruce Willis at the same time. However, there are some scenes. I talked to the director a few times, but he didn't agree to delete those scenes, so I didn't take it." Eric laughed. "Fortunately, you didn't take it. Otherwise, you wouldn't be far from box office poison if two movies failed in a row." Nicole was puzzled. "How do you know? This movie is from Disney, right? And it hasn't been released yet. Look at its release date. It's November 1st. A movie with a production cost of nearly $50 million being released on November 1st. I can't think of a second reason other than the movie being a flop." Nicole agreed with Eric's point of view. While feeling lucky, she joked, "Maybe Disney thinks that it's the same as the island and can ignore the release date." Chapter 430. That's just a gimmick. Scary Island itself has a very good plot, and the subsequent screening process spanned across the Thanksgiving and Christmas slots that have no competitors in the same genre. That's why it can get such an excellent box office through long-term screening. Nicole snatched the information from Eric's hand and flipped through it. She retorted, "Brave Heart also has no competitors in the same genre, right?" Eric didn't care that Nicole had snatched the information away. Brave Heart is a crime drama. This kind of movie is not a mainstream commercial genre. Instead, it's a little unpopular. Other than the celebrity effect of Dustin Hoffman and Bruce Willis driving the box office, the safest way to recoup the cost is to aim for the Oscars. However, Disney chose to release it on a large scale on November 1st instead of using pre-screening to accumulate reputation. This is equivalent to giving up the Oscars. It's an investment of nearly $50 million. After the box office results of this movie come out, more shareholders will definitely be disappointed with the current management. Nicole was distracted by Eric's hand on her thigh. She felt that he suddenly stopped and asked curiously, "What's wrong?" Michael Eisner must be aware of this. "I think Disney is likely to postpone Brave Heart." After Eric finished speaking, he stared at Nicole's delicate face for a few seconds and revealed a smirk. "Nicole, I'll give you a task. The timing now is very special. If Disney suddenly postpones Brave Heart, it will definitely become a hot topic in the media. You just received the female lead's contract. If the reporters ask about this, you can say that I told you not to take it after reading the script." Nicole immediately understood why Eric asked her to say this. Once she said those words, even if Brave Heart changed its schedule, it would still have a negative impact on the box office. After all, no one knew that Eric had foresight because of the memory of his rebirth. All his success so far was attributed to his keen eye for movies. Take the recent summer movies as an example. Anti-Condor 2-inch wanted to get rid of Eric's monopolization of the profits, but the entire series was completely ruined. Disney snatched the script of Throat Island from Eric, and it was a total failure. On the other hand, Terminator 2 and Pixar Animation Studio, which were not very promising at the beginning, shone brightly after Eric's hands. "All right, I will say so when the time comes." Nicole nodded and placed the documents in her hands on the coffee table in front of her. She leaned over and hugged Eric's arm. "Eric, are you really going to buy Disney? I've already caused such a big commotion. Do you think I'm playing around?" Nicole smiled and said, "No, I mean, did you earn the money to buy Disney from the crude oil futures?" Eric said, "Now a lot of people want to know the source of funds for my acquisition of Disney. This kind of information can easily be sold for more than $100,000. Are you sure you want to know?" "All right, I won't ask." Nicole shook her head. This question seemed to be a bit inappropriate. As a smart woman, Nicole quickly understood from Eric's words that it was better not to know this kind of thing. Otherwise, once the relevant information was leaked, she would definitely become a suspect. "It's best if you don't know about this kind of thing," Eric added, and then said, "The 2 slots of the new year are also very important for Firefly, so I will personally go to the various sets to take a look. How's the situation with Tough Cop? Why are you free today?" "I've been filming Rosie's scenes for the past 2 days, and I just happened to rest," Nicole explained. "What about Paula Wagner? She heard that this script was personally conceived by you. Of course, she was very interested in it. She didn't think much about it and took the position of producer. But Paula has also been preparing for Cruise's next movie, which is the prequel of Dark War. Paula also invited me to be the female lead. Sony Pictures also had this intention, but it was left undecided. I heard that Cruise did not agree." Eric thought that if history did not change, and Nicole had just arrived in Hollywood, there would be no problem for the two of them to act together. But now the situation was different. Nicole was already an A-list actress. Out of consideration for his own interests, there had always been very few A-list actresses in Cruise's movies. This was because the investors usually had a corresponding actor budget. If the actress's salary was too high, Cruise's salary would also be reduced. Don't worry about him. Just focus on Tough Cop. If this movie is successful, you will have the ability to compete with the box office. Maybe in the future, your salary will be higher than Cruise's. Nicole's eyes flashed with some expectations, but she could not help but shake her head. It's not possible. There are still too few scripts with the female lead as the center. Eric looked at Nicole and asked, "Didn't you practice ballet? Do you still have the foundation?" Nicole shook her head. "Ballet requires years of practice. I only learned it when I was a child." "Why are you asking me this?" "Because I want to see how you act in an action movie. I have never seen you act in an action movie." Although Nicole felt that Eric's words were a bit strange, she still said, "I have only acted in a few movies. Maybe I will try it in the future." In the original Space-Time, Nicole's acting career was very broad. She had tried comedy, musical, horror, biopic, epic, etc. But she did not act in an action movie. This was a pity. But in his memory, although there were many popular movies with the female lead as the main character, there were not many successful female action movies. After thinking about it for a while, Eric decided to wait until the end of the year for the two female lead movies, Ruthless Cop and Deadly Flower, were released. Especially Tough Cop, which was released many years earlier. If the box office was good, it means that the female lead movie has a considerable market prospect. Some female action movies can also be developed in advance. When the sky darkened, Michael Eisner and Frank Whale's car drove directly into the courtyard of a mansion in Beverly Hills. As soon as they got out of the car, Sam Lei Sherdong came up to them. After exchanging some pleasantries, Sam Lei Sherdong led the two into the mansion's dining room. Not far away, there were already people busy in the kitchen. After the three of them sat down, a sumptuous meal was quickly served. Halfway through dinner, they had a lot of probing words. Michael Eisner finally could not hold it in and asked, "Mr. Lei Sherdong, may I know why you invited us here today?" Sam Lei Sherdong slowly wiped his mouth with a napkin and said, "I heard that the management of Disney has encountered some trouble recently." Michael Eisner shrugged and said calmly, "Everyone knows about this." Lei Sherdong did not mind Michael Eisner's somewhat cold tone and continued, "Actually, Viacom also wants to join the list of companies that want to acquire Disney." Michael Eisner frowned. "Another one." Frank Wales looked at the silent Michael Eisner and turned to Lei Sherdong. "Mr. Lei Sherdong, Viacom operates a large cinema chain. According to the anti-monopoly law, I'm afraid it's not suitable for them to acquire Disney, right? If we can reach a certain consensus today, I'll divest the cinema chain business in a short period of time. This way, it won't violate the federal law. What about the funds?" Frank Wales asked again. Sam Lei Sherdong said, "Actually, I've been planning to acquire a movie company since a year ago, so I've been secretly preparing. The first one I had my eyes on was Paramount, but now, Disney seems to be a better choice." Michael Eisner suddenly interrupted, "Mr. Lei Sherdong, why don't you tell us your conditions?" Lei Sherdong revealed a confident smile. "Michael, I know that you have some disputes with that Eric Williams. If Firefly buys Disney, you definitely won't be able to stay as Disney's CEO. So, I hope that we can cooperate. This is a win-win situation. If I buy Disney, I promise that you can continue to be Disney's CEO." Michael Eisner asked, "Then what do I have to do?" "You have to convince Disney's board of directors and management to stand on my side. I'm sure the shareholders won't ignore the opinions of Disney's management. Those people only see benefits," Michael Eisner complained as he recalled the cold treatment he received in the past week. Lei Sherdong waved his hand. "Of course, I'll give them enough benefits. As long as you give me 3 months, I can raise $5 billion. So, I hope that you can cooperate with me. You have to delay this acquisition as much as possible. The longer it takes, the more funds I can raise." "There's another very important problem," Frank Wales said. "We don't know how much chips Eric Williams has. Firefly's first offer was for $2 billion. If Firefly insists on its current strategy of full acquisition, the price will definitely rise to more than $5 billion. Lei Shedong said, I've already gotten someone to do the corresponding evaluation. During the oil crisis last year, Eric Williams raised a total of $700 million. According to the calculation of 5 times leverage, his income is about $5 billion. So, our strength should be about the same, but my connections on Wall Street are much stronger than his. So, in the end, in terms of financing, Firefly will definitely lose to Viacom. Michael Eisner asked, Can you be sure? Lei Shedong nodded confidently. Of course. I hired an excellent investment team from Goldman Sachs to do simulation investment calculations. Unless Eric Williams can predict the future, 5 times is the most likely future leverage he will use. $5 billion is also a relatively high number. Michael Eisner and Frank Wales looked at each other. Lei Shedong looked at the two of them and took his time to drink the coffee in front of him, patiently waiting for their decision. To be honest, if he could choose, Michael Eisner certainly hoped that Disney could remain in its original state. Because Disney shares were now very scattered, the largest shareholder only had 16% of Disney's shares. No one had absolute control of Disney. This situation made it easier for him to control the board of directors and firmly hold Disney in his hands. But now that Disney was about to be acquired, even if Lei Shedong did not make a move, perhaps other companies would make a takeover offer. In this case, it was better to choose an acquirer that was more beneficial to him. Michael Eisner was not ignorant of Lei Shedong. Lei Shedong was also a person with a strong desire for control. But compared to Eric Williams, who wanted to kick him out of Disney, Lei Shedong was undoubtedly a good choice. Mr. Lei Shedong, if you want us to cooperate, I hope we can sign an agreement. I want absolute control of Disney. That's impossible. Lei Shedong shook his head. Michael, in fact, since the failure of Throat Cut Island, even without the current acquisition, you will no longer be able to get absolute control of Disney. You should face this fact. A few years ago, Disney shareholders allowed you to control the board of directors because you can bring enough benefits to them. When Michael Eisner heard these words, he suddenly looked a little embarrassed. Lei Shedong continued, Of course, if I can acquire Disney, I will still give you enough authority. I can guarantee this. Michael Eisner snorted coldly in his heart. Such a guarantee was almost equivalent to no guarantee at all. Lei Shedong seemed to see Michael Eisner's concerns. He got up and left for a while. Soon, he came back with a document and said, I know what you are thinking. Words are no guarantee. This is a contract I got someone to draft. You can take a look first. If I acquire Disney, you can still control Disney's most important strategic planning department, consumer products department, and radio and television department. Viacom will only strengthen the supervision of Disney's finance department and participate in the development of Disney's film projects. Michael Eisner silently spread out the document, and Frank Wales also came over. After more than 10 minutes, the two of them finished reading the document together. Although the conditions in the contract didn't meet their expectations, this seemed to be the best result. Although he didn't want to admit it, Michael Eisner knew that Lei Shedong was right. After experiencing the failure of several movies, his absolute control in Disney had begun to waver. Even without this acquisition, Disney's shareholders would start to intervene in the company's affairs. Closing the folder, Michael Eisner looked up and said, Then, let's talk about the specific cooperation plan. It was raining in Los Angeles. It was a rare thing. When he opened his eyes in the morning, Eric saw the fine drizzle on the glass window. Nicole, who was curled up in Eric's arms, was awakened by the man's movements. She was in a daze for a while, then looked out the window. Her tone was inexplicably excited. It's raining. Yes, Eric said. Just as he was about to get up, Nicole leaned over. Eric, sleep a little more. It's so early, and it's raining. Eric took the opportunity to lie down again. After so many days of tiredness, he should take it as a relaxation. Chapter 431. The rainy atmosphere could always evoke the deepest laziness in people's hearts. Eric had planned to give himself a day off, but just after 9 o'clock in the morning, his phone rang urgently. The helicopter landed on the helipad on the rooftop of Firefly's headquarters. Eric got off the helicopter, and Alan came up to him with an umbrella. The two jogged into the elevator, and Alan said, at 9 o'clock, Sam Lei Sherdong held a press conference at the Sunset Tower Hotel, saying that Viacom will participate in the bid for Disney. Almost at the same time, Michael Eisner also made a statement, saying that compared to Firefly, Disney is more willing to cooperate with Viacom. Stimulated by this news, after the stock market opened today, Disney's share price soared by 6% within half an hour. Eric listened to Alan's introduction in silence. The elevator door opened, and the two walked into Firefly's conference room together. At this time, the conference room was already full of people. The main executives of Firefly, several executives of Firefly Investments, and the person in charge of Morgan Stanley's acquisition team sat around the oval desk, chatting in twos and threes. When they saw Eric appear, the buzzing in the conference room stopped. Everyone stood up and looked at Eric. Everyone, take a seat. Eric waved his hand and walked to his seat in 2 or 3 steps. The person in charge of Morgan Stanley's acquisition team, Bernie Sanders, who was sitting on his left, handed over a document skillfully. Eric, take a look at the information first. We'll talk later. Eric nodded and opened the blue folder. The words, White Knight No. 1, were printed on the cover. Eric had done a lot of detailed preparation work for the possible problems that this acquisition might face after he returned to Los Angeles after completing the filming of Tornado. Therefore, he was not confused when he saw the term White Knight. White Knight was a professional term for the anti-takeover strategy between enterprises. The company that initiated a hostile takeover of the target company was usually called Black Knight, and the other acquirers that suddenly appeared during the hostile takeover were called White Knight. The White Knight usually obtained the approval of the target company's shareholders or management. From Michael Eisner's response after Lei Sherdong's statement, it could be seen that Viacom's acquisition had gained the support of Disney's management, or at least, the Disney power represented by Michael Eisner. Therefore, Viacom could be called a White Knight. Disney's performance had been poor for 2 consecutive years. Many people saw a great opportunity to acquire Disney. Before the acquisition announcement was made, Firefly realized that it was impossible for there to be no competitors in this acquisition, and there would be more than one. Looking at the information in his hand, Eric was secretly impressed by Morgan Stanley's team's value for money. Lei Sherdong's announcement was less than an hour and Morgan Stanley's team had already compiled a detailed information of more than 30 pages. Viacom Group's current market value was about $20 billion. It mainly engaged in TV program production, cable television networks, wireless radio stations, and other businesses. Among them, the most famous was the famous MTV Music Network. Many famous singers, including Madonna, became famous because of MTV. Viacom's leader, Lei Sherdong, not only controlled Viacom, but also ran a national entertainment company with a large chain of cinemas. His personal net worth was $4 billion. Lei Sherdong's Viacom Media Group had always adhered to the concept of content is king. The idea of acquiring a film company had been around for a long time. In the middle of the 80s, Lei Sherdong and John Kruger of Metropolis Media competed for Orion Pictures, which was thriving at that time. However, due to a lack of funds, they lost and quit. In addition, Lei Sherdong also invested in the stocks of several major film companies such as Warner and Columbia. From this, it could be seen that Lei Sherdong's sudden announcement of acquiring Disney was definitely not done on a whim. After reading the information in their hands, everyone quickly discussed the relevant countermeasures. Compared to Viacom, which had a market value of $20 billion, Firefly might be very weak. However, Eric's biggest advantage was that he had $8 billion in cash. When he took over the acquisition, because he didn't know the bargaining chip in Eric's hands, Bernie Sanders brought a promise from Morgan Stanley's top management. Morgan Stanley could provide $2 billion of financing for Firefly. If Firefly was willing to accept Wall Street's investment, the financing number could be increased. Therefore, in total, Eric could use more than $10 billion of funds. However, even if it was a hostile acquisition, of course, the less money spent, the better. Otherwise, Eric wouldn't have to pay such a high price to hire Morgan Stanley's acquisition team. He could have just offered a price that Disney's shareholders wouldn't reject no matter what. For Eric, the bottom line of acquiring Disney was around $6 billion USD. The remaining $2 billion USD would be used to pay off Disney's debts. This way, he could completely control Disney. Viacom only announced their intention to acquire today, which means that they are not prepared. For us, this is a huge advantage. Viacom's cash flow is not abundant. Without preparation, it will take at least 3 months to complete the financing. This period of time is the best time for us. Although Lei Shedong of Viacom is very good at financing, he is not without weaknesses. It is said that Lei Shedong's relationship with his wife is very bad, and they could divorce at any time. If Lei Shedong's wife suddenly asks for a divorce during the acquisition process, Lei Shedong may lose control of Viacom because of losing half of his assets. This will affect the investors' confidence. We can't pin our hopes on this kind of thing. The key is to seize these 3 months. However, if Mr. Williams doesn't give up on the acquisition strategy, Disney's shareholders won't mind waiting for a while. I think so too. If we only get 51% of the shares, we can easily complete the acquisition with less than $5 billion US. Disney's shareholders will also be very cooperative. Eric saw that everyone had changed the topic to changing the acquisition strategy. He said helplessly, "I'm sorry, everyone. I'll reiterate for the last time. The acquisition strategy of Disney will not change. I don't want to save $1 billion USD temporarily and have to pay dividends that far exceed this amount to other shareholders every year in the future." Everyone looked at Eric strangely. Although the film industry in Hollywood was developing very quickly, until now, the best performance of the major film companies was not more than $1 billion USD in annual profits. From Eric's tone, it seemed that he was very confident that he could run Disney into a behemoth with annual profits of more than $2 billion USD. The development of the entertainment industry was very difficult to predict. Just like in the 40s and 50s, when the big film companies were thriving, the Paramount Act made Hollywood fall into a cold winter for more than 10 years. It was not easy to recover and find a suitable way to operate, but it was hit by the television industry. Then, the launch of the home video recorder made Hollywood, which was facing piracy concerns, feel that it was facing a great enemy. Because of this, it also fought a lawsuit with Sony for more than 10 years. Although Hollywood had begun to recover again in the past 10 years, no one knew what would happen next. If there was another drastic industry change, Hollywood was likely to fall into a cold winter again. Looking at everyone's eyes, Eric could roughly guess what these people were thinking. Everyone had their own inherent thinking, not to mention that the people present were all elites in various industries. These people were not people who could be influenced by a few words. Therefore, Eric did not intend to explain. He just said in an indisputable tone, "So, let's discuss the acquisition strategy. Let's not talk about controlling shares anymore, okay?" Although Bernie Sanders did not understand why the young man was so insistent, he took the lead and nodded in agreement. The people at Firefly maintained their absolute support for Eric. The meeting continued. Although some corresponding countermeasures were discussed, because of Viacom's announcement to join the competition, the negotiations between the Firefly acquisition team and Disney were in a deadlock. There was no progress for the following month. Time slowly came to September. Firefly's 2 summer movies, Toy Story and Terminator 2, both had box office sales close to $200 million US, and the 2 movies began to enter the overseas market one after another. Both achieved very good results. Although they didn't release movies in the off-season after September like The Big 7, the 3rd season of Friends, the 2nd season of The X-Files, and the variety show Who Will Become a Millionaire were still on Fox in the fall. Friends had become Fox's absolute trump card, with ratings steadily maintaining more than 20 million viewers. Although The X-Files and Who Will Become a Millionaire didn't do as well as Friends, according to the ratings of the 3 shows, just the advertising revenue from Fox alone totaled more than $150 million US per season. The profits from selling the broadcast rights to hundreds of second-tier and third-tier TV stations in the United States were even higher. However, after several shows were released on Fox TV in September, it stimulated the stock price of Disney Studios. Eric did not know whether to laugh or cry, but there was nothing he could do. Because of the stalemate between the acquisition team and Disney, Eric began to transfer most of his energy to the film and television production of Firefly. On the set of The X-Files, in the northern part of the Santa Monica Mountains in Los Angeles, Eric had lunch with the crew and was about to leave. It was an afternoon in late autumn in September. Wearing a gray suit for acting, Famke Janssen followed Eric to the parking lot with his hands in his pockets. "I heard you guys talking just now. Are you really going to let us film in Canada for the next season?" The tall girl could not help but ask when they were about to reach the parking lot. "They said that the cost of filming in Canada can be reduced by more than 30%, Eric said and looked at Famke Janssen. "If you don't want to, then I'll reject this proposal and continue to stay in LA. I don't want to be hated. 30% of the cost is almost $10 million. Eric stopped and reached out to hug the girl. "For you, I don't mind spending an extra $100 million. Famke Janssen reached out to support Eric's body and teased, "Have you said this to many women?" Eric smiled and did not say anything, but he tightened his grip. Famke Janssen hurriedly begged for mercy. "Don't. This is a costume. If it's wrinkled, we'll have to clean it up later." Eric did not let go. He whispered into Famke Janssen's ear, "Come to my place tonight. I just asked the director. You guys are off tomorrow." Famke Janssen made a soft sound of agreement. Eric let go of him. The two walked side by side to the parking lot. Eric got into his car and waved at the girl before instructing the driver to drive. The car drove for more than an hour before they reached their destination again. It was the set of Dumb and Melon near Culver City. Before Dumb and Melon, the Three Women's TG Film Company had also produced Flowers at the End of the Road, so the progress of this movie was slower than Nicole's Tough Cop Flower. It was expected to wrap up in late September, but Tough Cop Flower had already finished filming in August and was now in post-production. In addition to the end of A Nightmare on Street, which was released on Halloween, Firefly's main release was Dumb and Melon and Tough Cop, two comedies. Apart from these two movies, Eric also had something to do with Home Alone 3, which he had given to Fox, and Dances with Wolves, which he had snatched from Orion last year. Fox would release Home Alone 3 in the new year, while Dances with Wolves would be released according to the standard pre-Olympic schedule. Eric didn't think much of the box office potential of this 4-hour indie film. He actually hoped that Dances with Wolves could squeeze out Disney's Beauty and the Beast as the Best Picture nominee. But there seemed to be other problems. In the original space-time, The Silence of the Lambs was released this year, and now it was equivalent to Dances with Wolves. Eric leaned back in his seat and was thinking about these things when he saw Drew bouncing over. She knocked on the window of his car and opened the door. "Eric, why are you here?" "I happen to have time today, so I came to take a look." Eric looked at Drew and smiled. Maybe it was because she was on set, but the girl was dressed very neatly. She wore a pink baseball cap, a white t-shirt, jeans, and a pair of small sneakers. Drew pulled Eric out of the car and said, "There's a scene that happened a few times, maybe you can help take a look." Chapter 432. After Eric handed over the script of Dumb and Melon to the girls, he did not ask about any of the preparations before the start of filming, except for a few suggestions in the notes. After the start of filming, Eric only watched some of the sample footage that Drew brought to the Pointy Corner Manor. The original director, the Ferrari brothers, was replaced by Keanu Reeves' famous director, Stephen Herrick, which did not affect the movie much. Eric decided to cast Stephen Herrick after watching The Adventures of Abby and Melon. The style of The Adventures of Abby and Melon was very similar to Dumb and Melon. He followed Drew to the set. They were filming a scene in which the two main characters, Lloyd and Harry, played by Jim Carrey and Jeff Daniels, found the money in the suitcase and squandered it. Speaking of which, the original soundtrack for this scene was very interesting. It used the classic soundtrack Pretty Woman from Pretty Woman, when the male lead took Julia out shopping and turned her from a sparrow into a phoenix. However, in Pretty Woman, Julia went through some dressing up and turned from a Cinderella to a princess. In Dumb and Melon, the two protagonists dressed up and looked even more comical. Eric and Drew stood quietly outside and watched the scene in the set. After a while, Eric heard the director, Stephen Herrick, shout, "Good." Drew smiled and said to Eric, "Eric, you're really good. You just stood here and did a few takes and you passed." "If the director heard this, he would be very sad," Eric said with a smile. "How can he compare to you?" Although the box office of his previous film, The Adventures of Abby and Abby, was good, the producers originally didn't intend to let him direct the sequel. It was only because he heard that we invited him to direct Dumb and Melon that he kept his job in the sequel series. Eric was not very interested in the little girl's Hollywood secrets. After the scene was finished, an assistant walked over to Stephen Herrick and whispered a few words. Stephen Herrick looked over. When he saw Eric, he quickly stood up and greeted him. Then he announced that the crew would be taking a break. "Mr. Williams, nice to meet you," Stephen Herrick said as he walked over with the other main actors. Eric shook hands with the bespectacled man in his 30s. Although the little girl said it with a look of disdain, it was only because Drew used him as a reference. In Hollywood, if a person could direct a movie in his 30s, he was definitely a person with great potential and talent. After chatting with Stephen Herrick for a while, Eric greeted the two male leads, Jim Carrey and Jeff Daniels. Jeff Daniels had played the male lead in many movies before, so he was more famous than Jim Carrey. Therefore, Eric was able to easily get the two male leads together. In Dumb and Melon, Jim Carrey's crazy acting completely suppressed Jeff Daniels' performance. In the end, Jim Carrey shone brightly, while Jeff Daniels continued to be indifferent, and would continue to be indifferent. Originally, Jim Carrey had broken his front tooth in an accident, but it made his role more classic. Since he had copied the script, Eric did not let go of this classic little detail. At this time, Jim Carrey's front tooth seemed to be missing, but it was put on by makeup. Stephen Herrick and Eric discussed some of the shooting details, and watched a few scenes with Eric before the crew started working again. Eric did not disturb them, and continued to stand far away with Drew, watching the live performance. After a while, an assistant director came in from outside the set and said a few words to Drew. The young woman nodded, then pulled Eric and said, "Eric, come with me, I'll show you something good." "What?" Eric was a little confused, but he still followed her out. Outside, Eric saw a double-decker bus parked on the side of the road from afar. A group of hot and tall women came out of the bus one after another. They were all wearing the same pink t-shirt and white high-waisted jeans, and most of them were wearing sunglasses. The women were chatting away, and they were cold to the crew members who came to greet them, like a group of proud canaries. "This is the good thing you said?" Eric pointed at the group of women and asked Drew. He noticed that the women's t-shirts were printed with the word Elite, and it was obvious that they were models from the famous Elite model agency. Thinking about the script, Eric could guess the purpose of these models. He sighed in his heart. It was just a few scenes at the end, and they could have just found some hot temporary actresses from Hollywood to make a cameo appearance. These women were not supermodels from Elite. Hiring these models who were not very famous would not bring much publicity, but it would definitely cost a lot of money. Drew was a little proud of himself. After seeing Eric's expression, he immediately understood what he was thinking. He explained, "We didn't spend any money. A week ago, when I was flipping through a fashion magazine, I saw that Elite Model Agency was going to hold a few shows in Los Angeles, so I asked someone to contact the person in charge of Elite. When they heard that you were the one who wrote the script, they readily agreed to sponsor us. We just need to add the name Elite in the last few lines. Oh, and that bus. It has the logo of the Elite Modeling Agency on it. That's all." Eric nodded with satisfaction. As he spoke, the group of models came over one after another. The chattering voices soon quieted down when they saw him and Drew. The modeling circle was not far from Hollywood, so it was impossible for these models not to know Eric. Because of the media hype during this period, Eric's fame had surpassed that of any star in Hollywood. Moreover, Eric was now worth billions of dollars, so these models' eyes quickly became eager. Eric felt a dozen pairs of undisguised hot eyes staring at him, and he felt very uncomfortable. These delicate and beautiful women were supposed to be the hunting targets of men, but now he seemed to have become the target of these models. "Hello, Miss Barrymore." After the dozen models came closer, the girl who was obviously the leader came over with a charming smile and greeted Drew. Drew smiled and shook hands with her. "Hello, Miss Claudia. Why didn't Mr. Mike Tanner come?" "He had an urgent matter to attend to in Milan. He asked me to apologize on his behalf. But I think it's enough to have us sisters for the shoot." "Of course." Drew nodded and was about to introduce Eric to the girl named Claudia, but Claudia had already enthusiastically extended her hand to Eric. "Mr. Williams. Hello. It's an honor to meet you. My name is Claudia Schiffer." Eric vaguely remembered this name. It should be a supermodel in his previous life. But looking at the girl in front of him, he guessed that she had just debuted. He smiled and shook her small hand. "Hello, Miss Schiffer. It's an honor to meet you too." Claudia Schiffer smiled and the corners of her mouth curled up, with a different kind of sexiness. She took a small step forward and said, "Mr. Williams, just call me Claudia." "Okay, Miss Claudia." Eric took a small step back. He couldn't stand the girl's undisguised gaze. "I heard that Mr. Williams personally wrote the script. My sisters and I have been looking forward to it for a few days. By the way, I've seen many of your movies. Cruise and Hanks in Dark War were so cool. Mr. Williams, do you think Andy really died in the end?" Eric felt that the girl had stepped forward again, so he had to take a small step back. He said, "Well, it's better to leave some suspense for everyone. You should have heard that Columbia has started the sequel of Dark War. Cruise will return at that time. It's a pity that you won't be the director. Then there's nothing to see in the sequel." Claudia Schiffer looked regretful. "Of course not," Eric replied. He looked at the girl who had been teasing him and glared at her with some dissatisfaction. Then he said to the models behind Claudia Schiffer, "Okay, I think everyone should go to the set and take a break. Although it's not too hot now, it's easy to get tanned standing under the sun." The girls were already very dissatisfied with Claudia Schiffer's hogging of Eric, but they weren't afraid of leaving a bad impression on Eric. Although they didn't hide their gazes, their actions were a little uneasy. Now that they heard Eric take the initiative to speak to them, they immediately rushed forward and surrounded Eric without any hesitation. A few models even pushed Claudia Schiffer out of the way. Eric was surrounded by a fragrant wind as he led the group of girls to the set. Drew looked at the girls and didn't mind. She shrugged her small shoulders and followed them. After they left the set, Eric called an assistant director and directly handed the group of beautiful vases to him to talk about the scenes. Then he found a place near a rest trailer and sat down. After the girls left, the girl squatted down beside Eric's legs and asked with a smile, "What do you think? Are you interested?" "What are you interested in?" Drew made a disdainful look and said, "I mean, which one are you interested in? I'll send it to you tonight." Eric raised his hand and knocked on the girl's head. He hadn't practiced for a long time, so this action was a little rusty. However, Drew's reaction didn't change. She rubbed her forehead and said, "I'm a big girl. Don't knock on my head. I'm curious, when did you change your profession to being a pimp?" "Tisk, good intentions don't pay off," Drew muttered. She looked at the group of girls not far away and said, "It's just a bunch of beautiful vases. Aren't they just for fun? Hey, how about that Claudia? She's very tall, has blonde hair, and her lips are very tasteful. She basically fits your taste. Why does it sound weird?" Eric smiled and said, "I think I've heard your tone somewhere before." "Oh, the vegetable market. Those vegetable sellers always use these words to evaluate the vegetables in their stalls. Look, my cabbage is fresh, porcelain, and freshly picked." Drew laughed a few times and said, "It's always like this. All right, stop fooling around." Eric patted the girl's head. "Besides, look at the way they looked at me just now. I feel like I'm their prey." Drew made an "oh" sound, but her eyes darted around. Then, she turned her gaze to the girls and picked. That Claudia Schiff is not bad. I'll take her. Eric didn't know what the girl was thinking. He quickly stood up and said, "All right, if there's nothing else, I'll be leaving first. I still have to go back to Firefly's headquarters." The girl was thinking about something. She waved her hand and said absent-mindedly, "Go, go." Eric reached out and pinched her tender face. He let go as the girl protested. After saying goodbye to the director and the others, he got up and left. In the afternoon, he discussed the progress of the acquisition of Disney with the acquisition team at Firefly's headquarters. After work, Eric drove to pick up Famke Janssen. The two of them drove to a restaurant on Sunset Boulevard in Hollywood and had dinner together. Then, they drove back to the Malibu villa. When they drove into the villa, the security guard at the door glanced at Eric. Recalling Drew's previous instructions, he didn't say anything in the end. After all, it had nothing to do with him. If he offended that little devil, he would be fired. After parking the car, Eric took Famke Janssen's hand and strolled around the manor for a while before returning to the villa. "What have you been drawing recently?" Famke Janssen asked casually as they walked into the villa's small living room. He picked up the portfolio on the coffee table and flipped it open. Eric made coffee for the two of them. He looked back and said, "Just randomly. Heh, is this a poker card?" Famke Janssen waited for Eric to sit down before raising a draft and asking. A black line appeared on Eric's forehead. How can a red heart be considered a poker card? Also, don't you see the patterns around it? Then what is this? Eric was just about to speak when he froze. In the end, he didn't hide it and said honestly, a ring design. Famke Janssen was also stunned. He was a little nervous but also a little expectant. "You mean, a diamond ring?" Eric nodded. Chapter 433. Are you going to propose to any girl? Famke Janssen tried her best to sound relaxed, but she couldn't hide the tremor in her voice. The relationship between the two was already in a delicate state of stability, but this state was built on the premise that Eric was unmarried. Once Eric got married, Famke Janssen couldn't convince herself to maintain the current state with Eric. Eric hugged Famke Janssen and exerted a little force. Famke Janssen resisted and leaned on Eric's shoulder. "Sorry, Famke, I don't plan to get married. Of course, I won't propose to a girl. I've always been a greedy person. But other than marriage, I'll try my best to give you everything you want." Famke Janssen sighed. Eric had indeed given them a lot, as she said, but women were greedy too. After receiving a lot, they would always want more. For example, marriage. Although many people's marriages were as fragile as a piece of paper, it was better than nothing. But Famke Janssen also realized that as Eric's power and wealth grew, these hopes became more and more remote. The newspaper said that if Eric completed the acquisition of Disney, the 20-year-old young man beside her would have a personal wealth of more than $5 billion. Famke Janssen didn't know how this number was calculated, nor did she know if it was accurate, but she could understand the meaning of this number. $5 billion was enough to enter the top 10 of the world's richest people. In other words, Eric would become one of the richest people in the world. If she were to be the lover of an ordinary person, she might be criticized for it. If she were to be the lover of an ordinary rich man, she might be scolded for being a gold digger. However, if she were to be the lover of a man who stood at the top of the pyramid, most people would think that it was natural. "I'm just thinking, what will happen when I'm no longer young? Will you forget me and never remember me again?" Famke Janssen hugged Eric's arm, her voice full of insecurity. Eric looked at her and asked, "Do you think I'm that kind of person?" "I don't know." Famke Janssen shook his head honestly. "I feel that you occasionally become very, very cold. It's like you're separated from the world by a wall. You stand on the other side of the wall, looking at everyone mockingly, as though you're watching a movie that has nothing to do with you." Eric was a little surprised. A few months ago, Chris had said something similar. At the time, he did not take it to heart. Not long after, Famke said the same thing again. This made him take it seriously. Famek, can you tell me more about this feeling? You're not the first person to say this, but I feel like I've always been normal. Famek Johnson thought for a moment before sitting up and looking at Eric. Then, Eric, answer a question first. In this world, what do you care about the most? Eric's face suddenly showed a blank expression. Famek Jensen looked at Eric's blank expression and said, "Look, you don't seem to care about anything." "You don't care about anything. That's the source of my feeling." Eric retorted, "That's not right. Many people are in this state. But you're not an ordinary person. You built up a fortune from scratch in a few years, yet you don't have any obsessions in your heart. Do you think that's normal?" Eric thought for a moment and said, "I do. I hope to control all of Hollywood. That's what I've always been doing." "Like playing a game?" Famek Jensen immediately asked. Eric frowned and fell into deep thought. He looked troubled. Famek Jensen didn't disturb him as he took out a portfolio from Eric's lap. He quietly sat beside Eric and flipped through it. Most of the portfolio was filled with sketches. There were sketches of every corner of the manor, as well as a few portraits of women. She recognized them, but she rarely saw them. After a long while, Famek Jensen felt Eric move. He closed the portfolio and smiled at him. "Have you thought it through?" Eric nodded, then shook his head. After all, he wasn't a person of this world, so it was inevitable that he would feel alienated from this world. Coupled with the fact that he suddenly had power and wealth that he couldn't touch in his previous life, this feeling of alienation became even deeper. Therefore, he often showed signs of unknowingly being at a loss. It was a worry similar to Zhuang Zhou's dream. He was afraid that this was just a beautiful dream and that he might suddenly wake up one day. Eric could not help but laugh. It was such a realistic dream. Even if he woke up, he would not have any regrets. Thinking of this, Eric reached out to Famek Jensen. "Come, pinch me." Famek Jensen reached out, but he only patted Eric's arm and laughed. "How cliché. If you want to know if you're dreaming, pinch yourself." Eric smiled mischievously and reached out to Famek Jensen. "Okay, I'll do it myself." If you dare pinch me, I'll ignore you for the whole night." Famek felt Eric's hand reach out to him. He laughed coquettishly, trying to get rid of Eric. After fooling around for a while, the two fell onto the sofa. "Famek, why don't you give me a child?" Eric suddenly asked softly. Famek Jensen turned to face Eric and hugged the man's waist. He shook his head. "No, if you want a child, let another woman give birth to one for you. They'll definitely be willing. I mean, if you have a child, your worries will no longer exist. Then do you dare to let people know that you have an illegitimate child?" In Western society, having an illegitimate child was still not something to be proud of. Many Western countries' laws still did not recognize the inheritance rights of illegitimate children. Often, the higher the status, the more taboo it was to have an illegitimate child. It was no wonder Famek Jensen said so. However, Eric did not care about this. "As long as you don't mind, when the child is born, I'll announce it to everyone. I'll admit that it's my child." Famek Jensen still shook her head. Although she was tempted, she did not want to have a child too early. After some thought, Famek suddenly took the portfolio she had been flipping through. She flipped to the ring design page and pointed at Eric. "I want this." Eric was a little surprised. This is for Vicky," she said. "It has to be one of a kind. But I think this ring is very beautiful." "You can design another one," Famek Jensen said as she looked at Eric without blinking her beautiful eyes. She had a look that said, "I'm finally acting coquettishly. How can you reject me? I've already shown it to Vicky. Do you want me to design another one for you?" Famek Jensen snorted and turned around, leaving Eric with his back facing him. Eric smiled, knowing that the girl was just putting on an act. After a while, Eric suddenly had an idea. "Right, you just said that the heart looks like a poker card. Maybe I can make 13 of them exactly the same and label them with the serial number of the poker card. That way, they'll all be unique. Which one do you want? My lucky number is 1. I want the ace of hearts, Famke Janssen said subconsciously. She suddenly turned around and glared at Eric. She said unhappily, 13. How many women do you plan on giving them to? Eric's thoughts were exposed. He laughed dryly. I'll collect them. Heh. Can't I collect them myself? Who would believe you? Famke Janssen reached out and pinched Eric. Do you also want to make the diamonds, spades, and club series to complete a deck of poker cards? Oh, that's a good idea. Seeing Eric's interested look, Famke Janssen immediately regretted her words. What made her even more regretful was that this despicable man really had the ability to achieve this goal. 54 women. Heavens. Famke Janssen felt that it was best for her to stop talking. She put the portfolio aside, sat up, and straightened her clothes. It's 10 o'clock. I'm going to bed. Shall we take a bath together? Eric asked with a grin as he stood up as well. Famke Janssen rolled her eyes at Eric and didn't answer. Instead, she walked upstairs. Eric shrugged with a smile and followed. After the two showered, Famke Janssen walked out with Eric wrapped in a simple bath towel, complaining non-stop. There isn't even any shower gel in this bathroom. There are so many servants in the manor. Can't they get someone to buy some? And they don't care about you. Eric said, they have the same thoughts as you. They think that others will care, but they don't care. Who asked you to be greedy? There's no benefit in having more women, right? Eric only smiled. He rarely worried about such things. These small matters had always been taken care of by the little girl, Drew. Recently, the girl had been busy making dumb and melon, so it was inevitable that she would neglect this. What a coincidence. Let's go to the supermarket tomorrow. Aren't you afraid of being watched? Famke pushed open the door to the villa's master bedroom and said with a smile. Eric said, it's fine as long as we're careful. We can take a helicopter to some remote places and secretly shop. Then forget it. It's like being a thief. It's not fun at all. Eric casually turned on the bedroom lights. Just as he was about to say something, the two of them looked in front of them in surprise. Directly in front of them, there was a person lying under a thin, light blue blanket. From the long blonde hair, it was obvious that it was a woman. Although Famke Janssen felt uncomfortable, she was more curious. She turned her head and looked at Eric with a teasing gaze, asking with her eyes what was going on. How could Eric know what was going on? If Nicole and the others were coming, there was no way they wouldn't greet him. It was even more impossible for them to appear here without a word. And the manor's security was tight enough. Eric was sure that this woman wasn't a crazy fan who had just barged in. Although he was already certain, Eric still waved at Famke, indicating for the girl to stay put. He walked forward. The woman was lying on her side. Her blonde hair was spread out on the pillow, partially covering her face. Eric walked all the way to the side of the wound. The woman didn't react. It looked like she was asleep. He looked at the girl's face. Because of the blonde hair, Eric didn't recognize her. Famke Janssen, who wasn't far away, couldn't wait to ask. Eric decided to interrupt the girl's dream. He reached out and patted her shoulder. In the afternoon, on the set of Dumb and Melon, the leader of the elite female models, Claudia Schiffer, found that after shooting a simple scene, Eric Williams had disappeared. She couldn't help but feel very regretful. If she could make friends with Eric, even if it was just to get a business card, she would basically have one foot in Hollywood. Although Claudia had made a name for herself in the fashion industry a few years ago, the attraction of Hollywood was very big for any model with some ambition. Although participating in the Dumb and Melon shoot was arranged by the company, Claudia Schiffer keenly felt that it would be a good opportunity to test the waters. So, she took the initiative to ask the company's supervisor for this unpaid job. Otherwise, with her average salary of $5,000 per hour, the Dumb and Melon crew definitely wouldn't have invited her. After the shoot, she was about to leave with the girls, but she was stopped by Drew. The girl used Eric's name to fool her, saying that Eric was very interested in her and wanted to go on a date with her. Although Claudia Schiffer could tell that the girl wasn't telling the truth, she still couldn't resist the temptation. After hesitating for a while, she agreed. Under the envious gazes of the other female models, Claudia Schiffer stayed alone. After the crew wrapped up, she and Drew went to the Malibu Point Manor. Claudia Schiffer was born in a family of lawyers in a small town in Germany. She had lived a good life since she was young, but the moment she walked into the magnificent shell-shaped silver building on the edge of the cliff, the original scruples, hesitation, and worry in her heart all disappeared. Only a faint sense of inferiority and yearning were left. Her whole person also became cautious. Until the end, when she was pushed into a bedroom by Drew, she didn't show much resistance. Even if she didn't get anything in the end, maybe this night would be a good experience. She thought so. This luxurious master bedroom with a view of the endless dark sea and the brilliant lights of Malibu seemed to be more reassuring than a hotel room. Eric didn't appear, and Claudia unknowingly fell asleep. She didn't know how long the sweet dream lasted, but she felt someone patting her. She reluctantly opened her eyes and saw a young and handsome face floating above her. It seems to be Eric Williams. She just sighed in her heart. This man is not only rich, he's also so handsome, and her mind was in a mess. Just as her lips curled into a slightly wild, iconic smile, she saw the figure of another woman appear in her field of vision. She was looking at her with great interest. "Ah!" Claudia cried out in surprise. She suddenly sat up and stepped back. "What's going on? Why did two people appear in front of me?" Claudia was at a loss. She was just infatuated with this man, but she didn't expect him to be so hateful. Claudia was about to muster up the courage to say something to reject him. At least let this guy understand that she wasn't willing to do such a thing, but then she saw Eric's expression change from confusion to understanding, followed by anger. He turned around and quickly walked out of the bedroom, leaving the two women who had no idea what was going on standing there in a daze. Moments later, Eric's angry voice came from the corridor. "Drew, come out." Chapter 434. Eric's voice gradually faded into the distance. He had probably gone to Drew's bedroom. Only then did Famke Jensen look at the blonde girl, who was still in a daze. After knowing that it was Drew's mischief, Famke Jensen's grudge dissipated significantly. Instead, he found it funny. He reached out his hand to the blonde girl and said, "Hello, I'm Famke Jensen." Claudia Schiffer reached out and shook Famke's hand. With an awkward expression, she said, "Hello, Miss Jensen. I've seen your X-Files." "Oh, I'm Claudia Schiffer. I'm a model." After greeting her, Famke Jensen said, "Miss Schiffer, I think we should go downstairs. Where are your clothes?" "Miss Barrymore took them away," she said. She said she wanted to give Mr. Williams a surprise. "Sorry, I didn't know you. Claudia Schiffer also knew that she had been completely deceived by Drew. Eric didn't know about this at all. "I see." Famke thought for a moment, took a few steps forward, and found Eric's clothes from the wardrobe. "If you don't mind, you can wear his clothes first. By the way, how tall are you?" 5 feet 11 inches, Claudia Schiffer said softly. "Ah, what a coincidence." "Me too," Famke said. It was unknown what he thought of, but he laughed. Claudia Schiffer took the white shirt and jeans from Famke Jensen and carefully put them on under the blanket. She couldn't help but ask, "What's wrong?" Famke shook his head and didn't answer. They had planned to sleep, but Famke had left his clothes in the bathroom. Now, he could only casually find Eric's clothes and change into them. After changing, the two girls went downstairs. A small living room was lit up with fluorescent lights. When they pushed open the door and walked in, the scene they saw made Famke and Claudia want to laugh, but they didn't dare. In the corner opposite the sofa, Drew, who was wearing a white t-shirt that exposed his midriff and denim hot pants, stood there in a daze. His feet were bare and stepped on the floor. What made Famke and Claudia want to laugh but not dare to was that the little girl had a big bowl full of fruits on her head. She was holding it up with both hands, her eyes were innocent, and her tender face had a pitiful expression. Eric sat on the sofa with his legs crossed, holding a magazine in his hand and reading it without saying a word. Famke Jensen walked to Eric's side and sat down, just about to say something to persuade him. But when he noticed Eric's tightly pursed lips, Famke realized that the man was really angry, so he tactfully shut his mouth. Claudia watched as Famke sat on Eric's right. Her gaze drifted to the empty seat on the left side of the sofa. Although she was tempted, she didn't dare to sit there. Instead, she walked to the single-seater sofa at the side. It was already late at night, and the small living room was very quiet. Only the occasional rustling sound of Eric flipping through a page of the magazine could be heard. Famke and Claudia originally thought that Eric would speak soon, but the silence lasted for half an hour. The little girl standing in the corner put away her pitiful expression, and a sense of uneasiness appeared in her eyes. Famke Jensen and Claudia, who were close to Eric, felt a faint sense of oppression coming from Eric. Famke Jensen was fine, but Claudia even became careful with her breathing, afraid that she would attract Eric's attention. Although she knew that the incident tonight was instigated by Drew, if she had rejected him in the afternoon, this wouldn't have happened. This made her somewhat regretful. She didn't know what would happen next, or if Eric would vent his anger on her. Although this young man was only in his 20s, he was already at the top of the Hollywood pyramid. If he wanted to vent his anger on her, even elite wouldn't be able to withstand the pressure. However, after thinking for half an hour, Claudia still couldn't figure out what had gone wrong. Why was Eric so angry? Could it be that she had disturbed his date with his girlfriend? It shouldn't be. She was also someone who often paid attention to gossip. She knew that he was a playboy with many women around him. If anyone was angry, it should be Famke Jensen. After a few more minutes, Eric finished reading the last page of the Variety magazine in his hand. Only then did he close the book and look up. Glancing at Claudia, who was sitting carefully on the single-seater sofa, Eric said, "Sorry, Miss Heaver. It's all Drew's nonsense. I hope it didn't cause you too much trouble." Claudia Heaver's heart, which had been hanging in the air, calmed down. She hurriedly shook her head. No problem. Actually, Eric waved his hand at the woman and said, "It's already very late. Rest here for the night. I'll get someone to send you back tomorrow." Okay. Claudia Heaver hurriedly stood up. Eric whispered a few words to Famke Jensen. The woman nodded, got up, and left the living room with Claudia. After the two women's figures disappeared, Drew, who was still holding the big bowl, called out softly. He was like a frightened cat carefully probing with his claws. Eric looked at the girl's anxious expression and his heart softened. Thinking of what happened today, his expression became serious again. "Do you know what you did wrong?" The girl wanted to nod, but just as her head moved, she immediately realized the thing on her head. She could only raise her small chin slightly and say, "I know. I shouldn't have done such a ridiculous thing without your permission. I won't do it again." "It's not that. Think again." Eric pretended to pick up the magazine in front of him again. The girl hurriedly stopped him. "Don't, let me think. Drew's little head buzzed quickly. She felt as if her brain circuits were fried, but she still had no clue. "Eric, you should just beat me up." Eric sighed. If this girl could understand this, she wouldn't have done such a thing. "I've always hoped that you can become a good producer and help me in the future. I've always been doing it. I've been working very hard these days. Julia and Liz can testify. But what you did today was very inappropriate. If this gets out, what do you think will happen?" Drew thought for a moment and shook her head honestly. She didn't think anything would happen. If it got out, so be it. Who could do anything to her? Eric had no choice but to say, "If it gets out, then you'll never be an outstanding producer. Many people will only treat you as a mediocre broker. With such a reputation, those truly capable and talented people will instinctively feel apprehensive when they hear that they want to work with you. And more speculators will gather around you with all kinds of thoughts." Seeing Drew's thoughtful expression, Eric gestured for the girl to take off the big bowl on his head. He said, "I'll pursue the woman I like. You're not allowed to do such a thing in the future, okay? Drew put the big bowl on the coffee table, twisted her stiff neck, and quickly nodded. Thinking that today's incident was over, the girl giggled and leaned on Eric. Eric glared at the girl and warned, "Don't think I'll let you off so easily. You'll be grounded for 3 days. Stay at home and reflect on your actions." "Ah no, I still have to go to the set of Dumb and Melon." Drew didn't seem like a shut-in at all. Not going out for 3 days was worse than going hungry for 3 days. "I'll call Liz. You don't have to worry about it." "Eric, how about 2 days?" The girl haggled with pitiful eyes. 4 days. Okay. 3 days it is." The villa was quiet in the early morning. Claudia Schiffer walked out of the guest room and strolled along the circular corridor. She passed by door after door, curiously guessing what was behind each door, but she didn't dare to barge in to see what was inside. After circling around, she walked down the stairs on the west side of the second floor. On her right was the kitchen. Claudia glanced inside and saw Famick Johnson busily making breakfast. She walked in. Famick noticed Claudia's figure and greeted her. "Good morning, Miss Schiffer. Did you sleep well last night?" "Very well," Claudia answered. She glanced at the steaming soup pot and asked, "Do you need my help?" Famick sized up Claudia and saw that she was still wearing Eric's clothes from last night. She was barefoot. He shook his head and said, "No need, I'll be fine by myself. There are slippers in the shoe cabinet by the door. Eric is in the gym. Perhaps you can talk to him." Claudia nodded and asked for the location of the gym before walking out. Although the villa's floor was a little cold, it was very comfortable to walk barefoot. Claudia didn't take the slippers and went straight to the gym. Eric was jogging on the treadmill. When he saw the girl appear, he nodded in greeting and pointed to another treadmill beside him. Claudia subconsciously walked over and stepped onto the treadmill beside him. She walked slowly, sneaking glances at Eric from time to time. The man was wearing a white singlet, revealing his muscular upper body. His chiseled, handsome side profile made Claudia's heart race. "Where are your shoes?" Eric looked at the girl's outfit and asked. Claudia was startled by Eric's sudden question. She quickly stopped and replied, I don't know." Eric recalled the situation from last night and didn't pursue the matter. He changed the topic and said, "Has anyone told you that you look like someone?" "Bicky Bardot?" Claudia answered. Bicky Bardot was a sexy female celebrity in the 50s and 60s who was as famous as Marilyn Monroe. She was nicknamed Sexy Wild Cat. Not long after Claudia's debut, someone said that she was very similar to Bicky Bardot. This had a lot to do with the fact that she was able to gain a good reputation in the fashion industry in just 2 to 3 years. "Yeah, the way you're barefoot reminds me of her movie, God Created Woman." In the movie, Bicky Bardot was used to walking around barefoot. I have to say, beautiful women are really God's favorites. If it wasn't for Bicky Bardot, that messy movie about a love triangle would definitely be a flop. Claudia regretted that she didn't watch Bicky Bardot's movies. As a result, she didn't know how to talk to Eric. Chapter 435. Eric noticed that the girl was a little confused. He considerately stopped talking about the plot of the movie and said, "By the way, do you know what Bicky Bardot's sexiest pose is?" Claudia knew about this. Although she had not watched Bicky Bardot's movie, she had seen some related pictures. Bicky Bardot's sexiest pose was undoubtedly lying on a large bed with her 2 slender and sexy legs swaying. She supported her cheek with one hand and revealed a wild and charming smile. It was said that Bicky Bardot had posed in many movies. "I know." Claudia nodded and looked at Eric with a smile on her face. She seemed to be waiting for something. Eric opened his mouth and realized that it would be inappropriate to continue talking. There were 2 other women at home today, so it was obviously inappropriate. He could only change the topic. "When did you enter the industry?" Claudia recalled. "In 1987, I was dancing with my friends in a disco. A talent scout left me a business card, and then I started working until now. Do you like this job? Claudia thought for a while and said, I like it a lot. Because of my height, I think this profession is the most suitable for me. I have always been taller than the children around me since I was young. No matter where I stood, I was always stared at. I felt very awkward and a little inferior. It wasn't until I became a model that I finally found my goal. It's just that my father has always been worried. He always wants me to inherit his law firm. How did Drew fool you yesterday? I think you're a very smart girl. You shouldn't be so easily fooled, right? Claudia recalled the experience from yesterday until now and smiled awkwardly. She quickly gathered her courage and looked at Eric with a burning gaze. Actually, I just think that if it's you, even if there's nothing, it will still be a good experience. This is really an honor. Since she had already gathered her courage, Claudia no longer had any scruples. She said, Actually, when I came to Los Angeles, a friend said that it would be great if I could meet Eric Williams this time. I didn't expect to really meet him. Eric smiled and asked, Now that you've seen him in person, how do you feel about him? He's very gentlemanly and charming. Claudia smiled as she spoke. I just don't know if I'll have a chance to date him again. Maybe. Eric smiled non-committally. He looked at the monitor on the treadmill and slowly stopped. He greeted the girl, got off the treadmill, and walked to the bathroom. After breakfast, Eric sent Claudia back to her hotel on his way to work. Along the way, the two of them had a pleasant chat. Claudia didn't mention anything about what happened last night, nor did she have any intention of asking for anything. It was as if she really treated this experience as a pure flaming jade. Coupled with her good upbringing, Eric had a better impression of her. When the car stopped in front of a hotel in Beverly Hills, Claudia boldly leaned over and kissed Eric. But just when she was about to get out of the car, she was stopped by Eric. If you want to develop in Hollywood, I might have an opportunity here. Ah, really? Claudia was pleasantly surprised. She originally thought that she would never see Eric again, so she didn't dare to have any extravagant hopes. The difference between the two of them was too great. If Eric didn't take the initiative, she wouldn't have any Cinderella dreams, nor would she be foolish enough to take the initiative to ask for anything from Eric. Eric gestured for the girl to sit down and said, Of course it's true, but this is only an opportunity. Whether you can seize it or not depends on you. But if you can pass the test, I'll definitely let the crew give you priority. Claudia asked, Then what should I do? Eric recalled that if he could successfully obtain the rights to adapt the comic, it would be produced early next year and released during the summer. Then, there wouldn't be much time left for Claudia. But that role was just a vase, and she didn't need much acting skills. She just needed to show her sexiness as much as possible. And Claudia herself was a model, so showing her sexiness was her specialty. So although the time was short, it was enough for her to make sufficient preparations. You don't have any acting experience. If you want this opportunity, you need to immediately stop all your work and sign up for an acting training class. You'll have to undergo at least 3 months of acting training. Early next year, I'll get someone to inform you of the audition. Just when Claudia was about to say something, Eric waved his hand. This isn't a small matter for you. I think it's best for you to consider it. If you don't work for 3 months or even longer, it might affect your development as a model. Furthermore, I can't give you any guarantees. Everything will depend on your own efforts. No, there's no need to consider it. I'll do as you say, Claudia said. What a joke. Eric Williams personally handed over the opportunity. Only a fool would hesitate to consider it. In just a few short years, Eric had already produced several A-list Hollywood superstars. Eric looked at the girl's excited expression and said seriously, I said before, this is just an opportunity. A movie involves tens of millions of dollars of investment, so this opportunity I'm giving you can only be grasped if you have enough ability. If your performance can't even pass the audition, I can only say that it's a pity. Claudia said, Of course I know. Seeing that the girl had made up her mind, Eric took out a business card, found a pen, and wrote a phone number on the back of the card. This is the phone number of Mr. Kapoor Sid of ICM Company. Contact him and say that I introduced you. He'll arrange a suitable agent for you. Of course, if you think that your current agent can adapt to Hollywood, you don't have to change. Claudia took the business card and carefully put it away. Then, I'll leave first. Well, you still have a contract with Elite, right? Do you need my help? No, I can handle it myself, Claudia refused. In a short period of time, Claudia understood that Eric preferred smart and independent women. She subconsciously wanted to show this as much as possible. After saying goodbye to Claudia, Eric told the driver to drive to Burbank. In the Firefly office building, when Alan saw Eric appear, he picked up a thick stack of documents and followed Eric into the office. Eric, the blue folder contains the latest progress in the negotiations with Disney. I've already marked the more important places. The red folder contains the second batch of producer files collected by the HR department. They are more likely to sign with Firefly. The gray folder contains the high-quality film project information selected by the production department. Lei Shedong was currently frantically raising funds, and Firefly insisted on the full acquisition strategy. Therefore, there would not be much progress in the negotiations with Disney in the short term. Eric directly put the blue folders aside and opened a red folder. After Robert Shea left, Firefly had been integrated and developed for more than half a year. Eric, Michael Lynn, and Jeffrey had a clearer division of labor. Although Michael Lynn was the CEO, he was very self-aware. He was not as opinionated as Robert Shea, so he completely followed Eric's arrangements and focused on expanding Firefly's distribution channels. He even handed over many of the company's administrative affairs to Jeffrey. As the president of Firefly, after helping Eric complete the production of Tornado, Jeffrey also focused on the company's management. He would not personally be a producer in the future. Eric did not have a specific position in Firefly. He could manage everything, but he could also ignore everything. However, all of the company's film projects had to be approved by Eric, and no one in the company objected to this. Firefly's production plan for next year had expanded to 8 films. They had to sign a group of professional producers, just like the Big Seven. Recently, Eric's job was to choose the producers and the film projects for next year. Alan, how's the negotiation with Dark Horse Comics for the adaptation rights of Disguised Stranger? Alan was about to leave when Eric thought of Claudia and asked. After signing Jim Carrey, Eric had been planning to take over the film adaptation rights of Disguised Stranger and hand it over to TG to produce. Throat Cutter Island failed miserably at the box office. Even if someone wanted to compete with Firefly for the rights, they would have to consider whether or not they would fail if they snatched it over. The seller would often become more cautious. If they handed it over to someone other than Firefly and it failed, then the originally priceless rights would become worthless waste. Therefore, Eric did not have too many scruples and asked people to start contacting Dark Horse Comics. The opportunity he just gave Claudia was the female lead of Disguised Stranger that made Cameron Diaz famous. In the original space-time, before Genius in Disguise, Cameron Diaz was just an unknown model. After Genius in Disguise, Cameron Diaz quickly became the new generation of Hollywood sweetheart in just a few years. From the beginning to the end, Eric didn't think that Cameron Diaz was beautiful in any way. The only thing that could be praised was his long legs. In terms of long legs, Claudia, who was 180 centimeters tall, seemed to be longer. Hearing Eric's question, Alan thought for a while and said, after negotiations, Dark Horse Comics has given up on the joint development plan. They should now be discussing the details of the contract. I'm not sure about the specific progress. Russell is in charge of this matter. Do you need me to call him over? Ask him to come to my office later. Also, help me make an appointment with the managers of a few jewelers tonight. What? Alan was a little confused. The heads of well-known jewelry brands such as Cartier, Bulgari, and Tiffany in Los Angeles. Just say that there is a business to discuss, Eric said. Seeing that Alan was still confused, he explained, it's a private matter. It has nothing to do with the company. Just help me make an appointment. Alan nodded and turned to leave the office. Chapter 436. The A Nightmare on Elm Street series, which had been produced at a yearly rate since 1984, had accumulated a considerable number of fixed fans. When Firefly announced that the creator of the A Nightmare on Elm Street series, Wes Craven, would return to film the final chapter of the series, it immediately attracted the attention of a large number of fans. On November 1st, Halloween, Freddy's Death, was released in more than 1,200 theaters in North America. In the first 3 days, it took in $13 million at the box office and received considerable praise. Although the final box office of the film would probably stay around $50 million, compared to the production cost of less than $15 million, Firefly could still make a small profit in North America. In addition to Firefly's small success at the end of the year, Disney's The Storm, which cost $48 million to produce, announced that it would be postponed to the next year's summer as Eric expected. The reason given by Disney was that they were optimistic about the film's box office prospects and hoped that the film could fully display its commercial value. But people with a little industry knowledge scoffed at this statement. Although after the film was postponed, the creators either kept their mouths shut or talked nonsense when confronted by reporters. But then the Hollywood Reporter's interview with Nicole Kidman, the former female lead candidate of The Storm, seemed to reveal some inside information to the public. Nicole did not make any comments on the film. She just ambiguously said that a good friend did not recommend her to take the film. Nicole was one of Eric's rumored girlfriends. Most people could easily guess who the good friend was that could easily influence her choice of film. As soon as the news came out, the media, large and small, suddenly went into a frenzy and directly classified The Storm as a bad film. Disney's distinction became useless. However, this storm did not have much of an impact on Disney's stock price. Ever since Firefly announced the public acquisition of Disney, Disney's stock price had been slowly climbing for several months. At the beginning of November, Disney's market value had reached $4.7 billion, an increase of 34% in 3 months. Under the close attention of Wall Street and Hollywood, on November 4th, Viacom, which competed with Firefly for Disney, officially made a bid of $4.9 billion to Disney. It happened to be Monday. Before that, Firefly had already received some news. Eric came to Firefly's headquarters early in the morning to discuss countermeasures with the acquisition team. In the 3 months that Lei Sherdong had been raising funds, in addition to the seesaw negotiations with Disney's management and Disney shareholders, Firefly had also bought 4% of Disney shares at a high price. Currently, Firefly held 15% of Disney's shares, becoming the second largest shareholder of Disney. If the acquisition remained in a stalemate for a long time, Firefly could still request for a new election of Disney's board of directors at the next shareholders' meeting, thereby interfering with Disney's management and even further seizing control of Disney. Moreover, even if the worst-case scenario happened and Firefly lost the acquisition battle, with Disney's current stock price, Firefly could still make a profit of no less than $300 million. After Eric arrived at the conference room, the head of the Morgan Stanley team, Bernie Sanders, spoke first. According to the information we received, Sam Lei Sherdong has already divested the cinema business in his hands. Viacom has raised about $5 billion so far. In addition, Viacom also holds a small amount of Blockbuster shares. Lei Sherdong is lobbying Blockbuster in an attempt to obtain financial support from them. If successful, Viacom's chips will be no less than $7 billion. As Eric listened, he flipped through the information about Blockbuster in front of him. Blockbuster was the largest video rental company in North America, with more than 2,000 branches. Most importantly, as a video rental company similar to a retailer, Blockbuster had a huge cash flow. This was what worried Eric the most. In his memory, Lei Sherdong and Barry Diller had a hostile acquisition battle in 1994. After acquiring Blockbuster, they used their assets as collateral to obtain $10 billion. In the end, Lei Sherdong swallowed Paramount. Thinking of this, Eric asked, "Bernie, is there a possibility that Viacom would first use their funds to acquire Blockbuster, then use Blockbuster as collateral to obtain more funds to participate in the acquisition?" Bernie Sanders thought for a moment and shook his head. Although this is a very effective method, the possibility is very low. After Blockbuster changed owners in 1987, it has been expanding at the speed of adding 500 new stores every year. Its market value has increased by more than 30% annually. As long as the shareholders maintain their shares, they can double in less than 3 years. Under such circumstances, it's impossible to sell. Eric was slightly relieved. Although he did not know why Viacom was able to acquire Blockbuster a few years later, Bernie Sanders' analysis was not wrong. What about Viacom? Although Lei Sherdong currently has control over Viacom, Viacom shareholders shouldn't let Lei Sherdong do whatever he wants, right? Bernie Sanders nodded. Lei Sherdong may have raised more than $7 billion, but when the acquisition bid for Disney exceeds $6 billion, Lei Sherdong will face more and more internal resistance from Viacom. Once the price exceeds the psychological limit of other shareholders, Viacom may even have internal strife. Then, we can easily win this acquisition. However, we don't know what the limit is. There was a low murmur in the conference room. Eric quickly thought of a way to make Lei Sherdong voluntarily withdraw from this competition. However, moments later, Eric was disappointed to find that this situation seemed impossible. Lei Sherdong was a typical dictator. He had a strong will and would not listen to other people's opinions. Moreover, they were competitors now. When Lei Sherdong acquired Viacom a few years ago, he stubbornly put everything on the line and increased the price of Viacom from $2.25 billion all the way to $3.4 billion. After the acquisition, Lei Sherdong faced resistance from Viacom's management. He did not hesitate to pay a high severance fee and replaced all the senior management of Viacom. This showed his arrogant personality. Once such a person made a decision, unless he was at the end of his rope, the chances of him backing down were basically zero. On the day Viacom made the offer, Firefly immediately increased the price to $5 billion. The difference of only $100 million made people who were paying attention to this acquisition guess that this was just a test between Firefly and Viacom. For the next week, both parties did not seem to make any moves. However, only those who were personally involved knew that the acquisition team of Viacom and Firefly had become more frequent with Disney during this period. At the same time, many people realized that the Thanksgiving and Christmas slots in the next 2 months would play a decisive role in this acquisition. This was mainly because Disney's management had not given up on the idea of lobbying shareholders to resist this acquisition. If Disney's performance improved in these 2 months, or if Firefly had a major change, Disney's management would likely win the support of a considerable number of shareholders again. Although the box office for the year-end slot was far lower than the summer slot, the intensity of the competition was not any weaker. On November 22nd, the first week of the year-end holiday, 5 new films, led by Fox's The Kid 3, including Disney's Beauty and the Beast, Firefly's Dumb and Melon, Paramount's The Addams Family, and Universal's American Rat Story 2, were released on a large scale at the same time. Although there was a 1-year gap in the development of the sequel, The Kid 3's momentum did not decrease at all. In the first 3 days, it earned more than $27 million in the box office in more than 2,500 theaters. It was unsurprisingly the box office champion for the 3-day weekend. This result surprised Eric, but he did not regret transferring the rights to the sequel to Fox. After all, the cost of this sequel was more than $50 million, and Fox's profit margin was not large. Close behind Home Alone 3 was Paramount's The Addams Family. The family fantasy comedy grossed $24 million in more than 2,400 theaters. Firefly's road comedy Dumb and Melon was in 3rd place. Eric arranged for this film to be released in 1,900 theaters, and the box office reached $20 million in the first weekend. Although this result was far less than the previous 2 works, Home Alone and The Addams Family had already accumulated a lot of fame through previous works or TV series. Dumb and Melon was a completely new work with no accumulated popularity. Coupled with the fact that the film had a very low production cost, the results it achieved were more noticeable. On the day of the first weekend's results, Hollywood film companies had already started to study the film, trying to find the key elements of the comedy's success and imitate it. They also quickly found the key, the male lead of the film, Jim Carrey. But when they learned about the contract that Jim Carrey signed with TG, most people gave up on the idea. In addition to these three films, Disney's Beauty and the Beast, although it had a good reputation, was limited to less than 1,000 theaters and only ranked 5th in the box office. It was even behind Universal's Cape Horror, which had already been released for a week. This film was directed by Martin Scorsese and starred Robert De Niro. As for Universal's other film, American Rat Story 2, which was co-developed with Spielberg's Abe Films, it only earned a pitiful $3.4 million in 1,700 theaters and became the first box office dud for the year-end slot. In the face of the open competition with Viacom and the petty tricks that Disney's management played from time to time, Eric did not rest during Thanksgiving. He even had Thanksgiving dinner with Jeffrey and the others. Eric originally estimated that the box office of Dumb and Melon would be around $80 million. As long as it could achieve this result, Eric would be satisfied. After all, before this, vulgar comedies had not cultivated enough audiences in Hollywood. But the potential that this film had shown was completely promising to exceed $100 million. Even Eric was not too worried about the box office of Lethal Cop. However, although Dumb and Melon achieved outstanding results, it was attacked by Disney. On the second day of Dumb and Melon's release, Disney criticized the film's vulgar style and Disney's business philosophy. If the two companies merged, this kind of vulgar comedy would undoubtedly damage Disney's healthy and positive brand image. In the face of Disney's somewhat unreasonable accusations, Eric directly made a strong counterattack. He said that after the acquisition, Disney would become a brand under Firefly, a subsidiary company, and not Firefly's main company. Therefore, the accusations of Disney's current management were completely nonsense. The works developed by different subsidiaries would not affect each other. After all, Touchstone Pictures under Disney had also produced a considerable number of R-rated films in recent years. After 4 weeks of Thanksgiving, The Brat 3's box office had accumulated to $80 million. Because it was the Christmas release, Fox estimated that the film's follow-up would still be able to achieve the same amount of box office. Because of the competition of the Brat 3's genre, Beauty and the Beast's 4-week box office was only $30 million. Although the film had a good reputation, the box office was not destined to be too big. On the other hand, Dumb and Melon's box office had reached $65 million. There was no doubt that the box office would exceed $100 million. Spielberg was destined to be a hurdle that no one in Hollywood could get around. When most people's attention was focused on Firefly and Disney's films, Captain Hawk, which Sony Pictures had high hopes for, boldly set the release date for December 6. Although the film's script had been greatly revised with the participation of Eric, including the addition of Nicole's role as a fairy, it still could not save the film's reputation. 2 weeks before its release, the media was booed. Sony Pictures originally estimated that the film's box office would exceed $40 million in the first week, but in fact, the film only made $17 million. Although the weekly box office increased as Christmas approached, it did not exceed $30 million in any week. This $70 million blockbuster was destined to recoup its cost by using Spielberg's personal reputation. Dances with Wolves, which was released at the same time as Captain Hawk, was even more inconspicuous. Although the small film's reputation was good, the film's 4-hour length kept most of the audience at the door. On December 20th, the first week of Christmas, Firefly's Hot Cop and Disney's New Father-in-Law were released at the same time in 1,900 theaters. As a remake, New Father-in-Law mainly relied on the fame accumulated by the original Elizabeth Taylor. Although the original was a classic, it had been 40 years since it was released, and its influence had long been lost. Therefore, the film only made $14.4 million in the first week. Compared to the old-school comedy style of New Father-in-Law, Hot Cop, which took the same lowbrow comedy route as Dumb and Melon, made a large number of audiences' eyes light up. Although the film's reputation among film critics was not very good, it still made $21 million in the first 3 days. Nicole played a serious but somewhat adorable female agent and Rosie O'Donnell played a coarse and fat policewoman, giving the audience who walked into the cinema a 100 minutes of hilarious movie viewing without the need to pee. Nicole's subversive performance in Tough Cop even made many people interested in Nicole's role as a fairy in Captain Hawk. Unknowingly, it boosted the box office of Captain Hawk. However, most of the interviewed fans also expressed that they preferred Nicole's performance in Tough Cop. The last day of 1991 passed quickly. With the arrival of the new year, the total box office statistics of the major Hollywood film companies for 1991 were released one after another. At the same time, it seemed to hint at the final battle before the storm. Although some of the films were still in theaters, the final box office of most of the released films could be roughly calculated according to the accumulated box office and the audience's reputation. Because of the war, compared to 1990, the total box office of 1991 in North America was only $4.8 billion. Time Warner still firmly held the position of Hollywood's Big Brother. 21 films were released in the year, and the total box office reached $750 million, with a market share of 15.6%. Even if they didn't want to admit it, everyone could see that Firefly's name was very eye-catching in the second place. With 5 films, Terminator 2, Toy Story, Freddy's Death, Dumb and Melon, and Hot Cop, Firefly got a total of $660 million, occupying 13.7% of the North American market share. Because most of its resources were bet on Throat Island, Disney only released 12 films in the year. The box office of Throat Island, which they had high hopes for, failed miserably, resulting in Disney's annual box office of only $380 million, and their market share slid to the lowest 7% in 5 years. Not only that, because of the interest and principal due to debts of up to $2 billion, Disney had a loss of $120 million. Stimulated by this data, Disney's stock price fell for the first time in more than 5 months. Disney's shareholders, who originally held a glimmer of hope in Disney's management, finally gave up completely and began to take the acquisition of Firefly and Viacom seriously. "I'm sorry, Mr. Bass. It's a pity that we couldn't reach an agreement. I hope we have a chance to work together next time." Eric stood in the parking lot of the Pointy Corner Manor and said goodbye to the 2 middle-aged men in front of him again. The 2 men who were about to get into the car and leave were named Sid Bass and Roy Disney. Sid Bass was the current head of the Bass family, who owned the most shares in Disney. Roy Disney was a member of the Disney family and Walt Disney's nephew. "I hope so." Sid Bass took another deep look at Eric and got into his silver car. Roy Disney's lips moved as if he wanted to say something, but in the end, he got into the car as well. When the other party's car left the Pointy Corner Manor, Chris, who had been standing quietly beside Eric, couldn't help but say, "Eric, I think the other party's offer is not bad. If you agree, Viacom will no longer be a threat to us." Sid Bass and Roy Disney's visit this time represented a large portion of Disney's shareholders. They hoped to exchange their shares for the company's shares after the merger of Firefly and Disney, not cash. As long as Eric agreed, this portion of Disney's shareholders would unite and help Firefly complete the acquisition. However, Eric still chose to refuse. Hearing Chris's words, Eric looked at Bernie Sanders on the other side and asked, "Bonnie, what do you think?" Bonnie Sanders shrugged and said, "I'm just a referral. In fact, when Sid Bass contacted me, I didn't have much hope. I know you've already made up your mind." Eric smiled and walked back with the 2 men. He said, "You should have heard that Barry Diller is leaving Fox in February." The 2 men nodded at the same time. During this period, they were quite concerned about the news in Hollywood. The news that Barry Diller was about to leave caused a great shock in Hollywood. Back then, Murdoch was an outsider. His main focus was still on the newspaper business in Australia and the United Kingdom. If it weren't for Barry Diller's help, Murdoch wouldn't have been able to enter the mainstream of Hollywood, and the development of Fox would have been even more impossible. Therefore, the inside story of Barry Diller's sudden departure from Fox became the subject of many people's speculation. Eric met Elizabeth during Christmas and asked her this question. The woman didn't hide it from him. Eric said, "Barry Diller is a very talented person. Barry Diller took most of the credit for the rise of Fox over the years. Mr. Murdoch also tried to persuade him to stay. However, probably last September, Barry Diller told Murdoch that he didn't want to be an employee anymore. He wanted to be the owner. Do you know what Murdoch said? Chris and Bernie both had curious looks on their faces. Eric didn't keep them in suspense and said, Murdoch said that Fox can only have one owner. Both Chris and Bernie fell silent. Eric continued, It's the same for Firefly. It can only have one owner. Murdoch must have realized that Barry Diller's departure would have a great impact on Fox's development, but he didn't consider a second option, even if this choice wouldn't affect his control of Fox. Many investors always instilled the concept of not being able to eat alone, and only by sharing benefits can they develop. In fact, this is just an excuse for them to seize control of the company. Those who sell their shares in exchange for development funds are often those who don't have much choice. If they had enough funds, I don't think the owners of Microsoft, Oracle, or Cisco would have chosen to go public. After most people succeed, they desperately want to increase their shares in an attempt to regain control of the company. Firefly is lucky. I now have enough funds to take a path that is completely different from other entrepreneurs. Although it's a little more difficult and the price to pay is a little higher, I think it's worth it. I definitely won't choose the relatively easy path that will bury many hidden dangers for Firefly's future. You're tuning in to the Narrate and Escape YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.